You're watching Poindexter Lounge. You already know.
What's up, nerd family? Welcome once again to the Poindexter Lounge. My name is Enosh, aka Enosh Fett, and it is good to have you with me in the lounge today. Now, look, if this is your first time to the lounge, just know that the Poindexter Lounge is a place for nerds. It's a place where you and me and my crew, my friends, our nerd family can get together and talk about all the things that we love. Things like TV shows, movies, games, sci-fi, fantasy, comic books, superheroes, toys, and so much more. And if those are things, ladies and gentlemen, that get you excited enough to drive your car into the desert with your FBI buddy and have a UFO encounter in which you're given a super suit that gives you amazing powers, but you accidentally lose the instruction book. But hey, on the plus side, you get to hang out with an early 80s Connie Selica. Yeah. Then, ladies and gentlemen, you have found the right place. So please hit that subscribe button as well as that notification bell so that you know when we put out videos like today. Now, we got a fun one for you today, and we're going to get right into it. But I do want to say a shout out to all of our supporters here at the channel. We definitely appreciate all of you, all of our Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for your support. All of our members, we actually have brand new emoticons in there that you can check out in the membership area. So if you join and you become a member, then you can be a part of that. And we have a meetup, a meet and greet this Saturday where all of our members and all of our Patreon supporters will get together and have a private stream. So if you're interested in that, sign up for it. All right. Well, here's the thing. A lot has happened this week. Zack Snyder has kind of, well, they brought up an old article, but it finally kind of broke some silence on a lot of things, for the new book by Sean O'Connell about the Snyder Cut. But these things being published have stirred people to once again to arms over Zack Snyder. The division over Zack Snyder's vision for the DC characters has risen and come back once again, just like Superman back from the dead, maybe with a CGI upper lip. Because there's a lot of people who are kind of butthurt about it. And ladies and gentlemen, one man who had a lot to say about that this weekend that really inspired me. You love him. I love him. He's been on the channel before, and we are very glad to welcome back Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett. How you doing, sir?
How are you, sir? Thank you for having me on the channel.
Yeah, man, I'm glad to have you back, man.
Good to see you again.
Yes, I've wanted to have you back for a while, and when I saw your video this weekend, I was like, yeah, we need to talk about that. We need to talk about this because this is like we're right on the cusp of something that was said would never happen. There were a lot of people who said, no, it's a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. There were some who just absolutely denied it. There was a lot of confusion.
I was one of them.
Yep. There was a lot of confusion over it, and I agree with what you say. I mean, there's people who don't understand the difference between like a cut and a finished movie. Well,
I come from post-production, and you can. It's funny when I've said to people, I've been able to watch cuts of movies, even the film that I produced, that I edited, that I have in festivals. You could watch a cut of that movie for 3 years, but it wasn't done. You could watch it from beginning to end, but it wasn't finished. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of people don't understand that. And I don't expect people to. If you don't work, especially if you don't work in post-production, it's hard to explain to people what that means. And even people in the industry, when they watch things, I watched it. I watched the whole thing, but they look, you can have effect shots when an effect shot is made for a film, right? Let's just say one effect shot. You could get 10 iterations of that shot. And in your cut, you might have iteration 2, but it's going to go through another 8 more iterations. Now it's there, it's in the cut. So the cut's finished. The shot is what it's going to be, but it's being developed, especially say if the shot involves water. I mean, it used to be really hard to when I was working on Superman Returns, one of the things that I think it was Rhythm and Hughes? One of the effects companies was very happy because they came up with a new water program that made the ocean look more realistic. And so there were many iterations of shots of the boats in the ocean, the ship, the yacht that Luther has in that, and then later when the seaplane lands, because water was really hard to do convincingly. And there were many iterations of that shot. Now those shots were in the cut of the movie, but they weren't done.
Yeah.
You know, and the same is true of sound design, and so that, and then of course when we're talking about Justice League was then taken over and turned into something different and finished. So the Justice League movie as it existed was completed. And when it comes to things like contracts in Hollywood, like the Writers Guild of America,
great point,
and SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, when a movie is done and the contracts are completed, well, they're completed. So you can't, there are things that you can and cannot do based on those contracts. And like, for instance, Zack Snyder has a long history of having multiple cuts of his movies. But the thing with multiple cuts of movies is it's one thing to shoot a movie and finish it and then, you know, add deleted scenes in or something. That's one thing. That doesn't really tread on talent contracts or something. But when a movie comes out and it's released, it's kind of finished. Those contracts have been completed.
And the job's done.
Job's done. Yep. And the idea of a Snyder cut, one of the things that I was always saying, that one of the reasons it, from the very beginning, I was saying why it wasn't going to happen is it's unlike, say, Watchmen, which has 3 different cuts of the movie. Watchmen was still Watchmen. It was a project that was completed and finished. It wasn't like someone went in and said, we're going to do a whole reimagining of this movie.
And that's,
And they had to go do that. And one of the things that was reported when it came out, the methodology behind the Snyder Cut back in November of 2019, that's when At&t had taken over Warner Brothers, and they had approached Zack Snyder because of this is where the movement released the Snyder Cut comes into play. The At&t executives are like, look at all these people. There's a whole movement out there for this thing. Well, we're launching a new streaming show. Can we make it? Can we have this thing? Now, the At&t executives, they don't have history. They're not worried about having mud in their eye. They're like, there's people out there clamoring for a product, and we want to push it through our infrastructure. Can we make this thing?
Yep.
And they don't care. I mean, they already have $150 billion of debt. What's a little bit more money if we can start putting things on our new streaming platform? And it's all about business. And I think that one of the problems when you're dealing with fans is fans are very unaware of the business. I mean, they understand the business in terms of looking at box office, but when it comes down to really drilling down into, say, papering a deal, when you're the finer points of what do people get and how do these contracts work and how do they work with the guilds, whether it's At&t or whether it's SAG, which is the Screen Actors Guild, or the Writers Guild of America, or the WGA, the Writers Guild of America. What does that all mean? And they have very strict rules, and the studios are signatories to all of these guilds, which means they have to abide by not just the rules of the DGA, but also all the rules of SAG, the WGA, At&t, all the different guilds. That's what it means to be a signatory. So there's a whole level of business that has to happen before you can do anything with a cut of a movie, especially a cut of a movie that's been completed. And that's something that it's often forgotten in the conversation.
Well, and you know, that's the thing. I just saw a comment here, and I'll bring it up because we always have a great chat room here, and so I always like to make people part of the conversation. And this is not on you, because I want to answer this, because Steve here says, you know, hey Nash, don't you think it's interesting that most of the people who denies the existing of a Snyder Cut, like Robert, now they advocate for it? I want to point out there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference in people who like what Robert, like what you just explained, you got into the logistics of what a cut would be. Like you said, it's a different movie. It's a whole new project.
Well,
it's like finishing one project and then saying, well, we're going to go do this other thing now. And you know, it's a different thing. So people have to get paid for those things, and they can't just, they don't just do pro bono things that, you know, you mentioned many times in your video, you know, it's not called show friends. It's show business. So everybody thinks, well, all these guys are just friends and they're just buddies. And they're like, yeah, come on over for the weekend and we'll finish the Snyder cut. You know, like it's that easy.
Also, you know, when I was here's what people need to understand. After one day of shooting a movie, editors usually start on a movie. I've explained this before. People start way before on a big effects heavy movie, but there's always a cut of a movie to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, you might only have the first 2 scenes cut, but there's a cut you can watch. You can sit down and watch it. What I was saying when I said there people were saying that there's a finished cut of this movie somewhere, that we were being denied a finished cut of Zack Snyder's Justice League. There was never a finished cut. And people thought, well,
that's why he needed money to finish the effect shots.
He needed, let's face it, closing in on $100 million.
Yeah.
I mean, this was not, and that's what I always said. There's no finished cut of this movie. There's nowhere near a finished cut of the film. You can certainly sit down and watch it from beginning to end, but even that has been completely changed since he's gotten into this. And so this idea, anybody that was ever saying there's a finish, even when you have our storyboard artists and beloved figures like that, who obviously know what they're talking about, when they say, yeah, you can watch the movie, you can watch a finished cut of the movie. Well, there's a cut there, but it's not finished.
Well, I can sit and watch the Donner cut, right, of Superman.
Even that's not finished. And it was released.
Exactly. That's not finished. And actually, Robert, you know, like I grew up with Superman 2. It's one of my favorite movies. And the thing is I know that there's a lot of fans who are like, oh, the Donner cut is so much better. And there may have been things there that if that had been finished and I had grown up with that, I might feel differently about it. But honestly, when I watch the Donner cut, I honestly check out, because it's like when it goes from these awesome scenes that are finished and look great, and all of a sudden they're like on a sound stage and it's cheesy and, you know, they look different and everything. It just takes me out of the film. And so, you know, that it's like, I always talk about, like, as a musician, right? You record something, you do a mix, right? And then you listen to it on different things, you know, you make sure that the mix sounds good, that everything is sound, and then you come back and you make changes. Well, if you come to me at the end of my projects, the albums that I've recorded and things like that, I got a stack of CDs and different things that I have that you could listen to mixes all day or cuts of these songs, but it's not what the final product would be. And so I like to be realistic. And this is what I keep saying too. There's a difference between people like yourself, Robert, who you're not against Zack Snyder having his vision done. You're not against Zack Snyder having a chance to finish his film. And I think that that's important for people to understand. In the same token, there are some people who are just absolutely just against Zack Snyder being able to finish his film, being able to have the ability to go back after the tragedy that befell his family and finish what was supposed to be Justice League. And look, that if you want to have a problem with somebody, look towards that and say, okay, what's that issue there that somebody like literally just doesn't want somebody to be able to have the right to finish their film. But don't be upset at people who are supportive of something. Like, even isn't the whole point, guys, of the Snyder Cut movement and everything is we want people's support. We want people to come on board, even if they didn't think that there was going to be it. That's fine. Who cares? Let's welcome people in and let's enjoy and celebrate the fact that we have this now, you know.
Well, what's interesting is everything that's happened since November of 2019 proved that there was no finished Snyder Cut. There was no releasable version of that movie.
Yeah.
And what was interesting, it's funny to me that I even did a show, as was pointed out to me, I think it was November 24th or something, when HBO Max was announced. I did a show on my own channel where I said, you know, because one of the things that I also said about the Snyder Cut was who was going to pay for that? And I was always saying that it was going to cost tens of millions of dollars to finish a version of that movie. And yes, I was correct. Only because I worked at Warner Brothers. Yeah. I began my film career working in there's different departments in Warner Brothers. I worked for physical production. My first boss in the industry was Bill Young, who was the senior vice president of feature film production at Warner Brothers, which means we oversaw the physical production of every movie that Warner Brothers made. And one of my favorite departments was the post-production department. And I learned an incredible amount of how post-production was done at the studio level. Mm-hmm. And then on the movies I've worked on, especially the special features I created for things like X-Men and X2 and Superman Returns, I spent a long time in the edit bays with like Elliot Graham and John Ottman, who edited Superman Returns. And then John went on to edit movies like Valkyrie. And I was in the edit bay watching for 2 years while a movie was refined and developed. Mm-hmm. So my knowledge of post-production is pretty extensive, being an editor and now post supervisor myself. So when I was saying these things, it wasn't because I didn't want them. Yeah. I'm not saying I don't want to see this. I'm just like, look, you guys, what you think exists. And it was frustrating to see people come out and go, no, there's a cut of the movie. I'm like, of course there's a cut of the movie. There's always a cut of the movie. I watched cuts of Superman Returns for 2 years, but it wasn't finished. And even when it was finished, then the studio said, well, people don't like this. We're going to cut a half an hour out of the movie. And I'm like, really? Yeah. Are you? And they did. They cut a half an hour out of Superman Returns, and it's too bad.
Yeah, that was mind blowing. The last time you were here, you dropped that science on us that there was that there was more to Superman Returns even than what we saw. So there's
Hal Penn's character had dialogue. I mean,
wow.
There was a lot more to the movie, and I was a big fan of that. But that again, that was a studio call. But yeah. So in 2019, when and another thing. You have to understand too about the politics of what goes on at a studio. And Hollywood is a very cutthroat business, and the people that run studios are in one of the most high pressure jobs in the industry. And you're talking about, and Warner Brothers at that time, when we go back to, they were in direct competition from a shareholder's point of view and from an industry point of view with what Marvel was doing. And the idea is, you're coming off of Nolan's Bat trilogy, which was enormously successful. When Christopher Nolan took over Batman Begins, they were like, I wonder if we can bring this franchise back from the debacle that was Batman and Robin, Joel Schumacher's final. And so they basically said, we have a filmmaker in Christopher Nolan who has made Following, who has made Memento. He came to the studio and he made Insomnia for us, which is a remake of a Scandinavian film. So they're fans of his at Warner Brothers. He's an up and coming director. Perhaps we've enjoyed your take. What might you do with Batman? So he gets sort of as an auteur, comes up with a take basically with his brother, famously doing things in their garage and all of that, and brings a startling new realistic take to Batman. And we all know what happened with Batman, The Dark Knight, and of course The Dark Knight Rises. Very successful and a very new approach to this character and DC movies in general. So this more of a quote unquote real world take on superheroes. And then at the same time as Batman Begins was being done, then the Marvel Cinematic Universe rolls around. They do Iron Man, and Iron Man, again, if you go back and you watch Iron Man 1 now, it's a very realistic take on that character.
Yes.
And the movie is really almost an intimate story. It's a character study of a man who comes to grips with his own conscience and of the sins of the past, in his case, corporate sins, Stark Industries and what they've been doing, and the selling arms all over the world, and Tony Stark having to come to grips with that and then fight for the soul of his own company against a former mentor. And if you go back and you watch Iron Man 1, it's astonishing where we're at 23 movies later and now with WandaVision. So the whole thing now, and then And then you have, okay, we've got Zack Snyder, another filmmaker that Warner Brothers was sort of bringing forward, doing things like 300, which was a big success. People were surprised, and whether he was doing Sucker Punch or which people liked or didn't like, and the Guardians of Ga'Hoole, or he was still a filmmaker that was Warner Brothers was in the Zack Snyder business.
Mm-hmm.
And then he gets an opportunity, does Watchmen, of course, 3 different cuts of that. So it's not unprecedented that Warner Brothers would allow Zack Snyder to do multiple cuts of a movie. And so they bring him on to do Man of Steel. I have been a huge advocate. I love Man of Steel.
Oh, man.
I've always looked upon Man of Steel as a science fiction take on the Superman mythos. It's a first contact story. I really loved Man of Steel. And are there problems with it? Do I have a problem with Superman allowing Jonathan Kent to die in the way he dies in that tornado? He could have, in the blink of an eye, probably saved his father. Yeah. But at the time, he's still listening to his dad.
Yes.
You know, he's not somebody that's even sure of his powers yet. So while it seems, because we're thinking about him as the Superman we all know and love, he's not that guy yet.
Nope.
And every time he's tried to save someone, he's gotten in trouble. People have seen things they shouldn't have, and the whole thing that the father is worried about. So I've never had a problem with the film, and of course, I love the Battle of Metropolis at the end, because I love seeing, as someone who read Alan Moore's Miracle Man, specifically issue 15, when you see somebody with that kind of power, a villain that is super powered, that's killing civilians and putting heads on pikes, killing thousands of people, waiting for Miracle Man to show up to battle him. I'm like, whatever the battle I'm watching at the end of of Man of Steel is exactly the kind of thing that would happen if 2 Kryptonians are battling.
Yes.
You know, and civilian casualties be damned. No one cares. Not when they're fighting for their lives. And when Superman's been Superman for a week, he's thinking like, a week ago, I didn't even know who I was. And now I'm fighting world engines and Kryptonian armies that are like, he doesn't know anything about anything. All he's thinking about is staying alive and saving the people of Earth.
And, you know, Robert, you bring up a really good point there, because I'm noticing this more and more. And as Zack Snyder has become more and more of this kind of dividing line for people, you know, and with his movies and his take, especially on the DC universe. But I'm amazed because, you know, he always talked about how he had this, you know, this 5-movie arc that was supposed to take Superman from the beginning, from that, you know, alienated person who grew up in the Midwest, had these powers, didn't know who he was. His dad, you know, tried to encourage him and told him about, you know, yeah, one day you're going to be this great thing, but, you know, you need to be careful and you need to make sure that you don't show off too much. And I'm like you, I've always preferred the idea that Jonathan Kent dies of a heart attack or something like that, because it's something that's out of Superman's ability to do anything. But I respect the fact that at least with the tornado issue, he's respecting his dad, and he's giving his dad that benefit of the doubt that, like, his dad's willing to even sacrifice himself for Clark's secret, for Clark's future. And so I can appreciate all that, but it's supposed to be this arc that takes Superman on this journey where he gets into Batman v Superman, where the world questions him, because that's what the world would do. If a guy showed up tomorrow in red and blue and was able to fly and had powers of a god and all these things, and you know, there was a major tragedy like what happens in Metropolis, people would question him. Is he really on our side? Is he really fighting for us? Is he really a part of something good? Or is this a trick? And when you realize that nobody on the planet can stop him, then you understand why somebody like Batman, an older weathered Batman who's seen things, who is at the tail end of his career, who sees now all of a sudden this supernatural being kind of come forward, takes it upon himself to realize, hey, I'm the only thing going. If I don't stop this guy, if there's a chance that this guy could go rogue and kill everybody, literally, I might be the only person who can stop him. And you know, and so it's supposed to take us on that arc, and then it was supposed to take us through Justice League, what we're going to see now, and then Justice League 2 and 3. And Zack has always said by the end of that, we were going to see Superman as Superman, because he would have gone through his arc. He would have earned it. I love that term, that he would have earned it, come through that. But what do you think it is, Robert? I mean, because you're so versed in film, and I love your love of film and your in-depth study of film. And
which is a lifelong thing. It'll never end.
Exactly.
I'll be on my deathbed. I'm like, I'll have moments left of life and I'll still be contemplating, you know, why did you say that name?
Yeah.
And I'll die.
And you're right. And so like, and that's how I am. I love film. I love pop culture. I love thinking about these things. I can talk about this stuff at length, but it seems like we've gotten to a point, and I don't want to just, put it off to, well, attention spans are short nowadays and, whatever, but literally people act like they can't handle the slow burn anymore. I mean, look at WandaVision. I've seen so many people complain about like the first 3 episodes of WandaVision because, well, it's not going anywhere. It's not doing anything. Nothing's happening. What's up with this, with this old, stuff? They're not showing anything. There's no battles. There's no nothing. Like, what's going on? And it's like storytelling. Robert, why can't we enjoy stories anymore? We don't want to be it seems like we don't want to be told stories anymore. We want to tell everybody what the story should be, whether it be Star Wars or DC or whatever. We want to tell the suits what the story should be. We don't ever want to sit back and just enjoy it like we did when we were a kid and enjoy what made us fall in love with these things to begin with.
Well, I think I'll tell you one of the differences I see is that, especially over the last 20 years, we have lost the diversity of stories. And when I say diversity, I'm not talking about people. Yeah. I'm not talking about racial makeups or I'm talking about the different kinds of stories we used to be exposed to. And like when I was growing up as a kid, I've told this a story before, but in the morning when I was a kid before school, I would watch the Our Gang shorts from the 1930s that had Spanky and Alfalfa and Darla and Buckwheat, and they were made in the 30s. And I'd watch those and I'd go to school, and I would come home, and there was a block of time, and this is back in the old days when there was only 3 networks, and so you would watch on our independent station in Seattle where I grew up. There'd be a block of like 3 hours of sitcoms. Not unlike the sitcoms from WandaVision, where you would watch I Dream of Jeannie or Gilligan's Island or My Three Sons or The Andy Griffith Show or Leave It to Beaver, Partridge Family, Brady Bunch. So over the course of what I saw in the morning and over the course of what I watched in the afternoon as I ate my Oreos and looked at my homework or whatever, I would watch pop culture from America from 1930 to the early 70s. That's a spread of over 40 years of different kinds of storytelling. Some was black and white, some was in color. And I would watch whatever was there because that was really all that was on. So I was exposed to all kinds of different things. And then as a science fiction fanatic, growing up as a kid, I loved whether it was Universal Monsters or Japanese science fiction or whatever I could, giant insect movies, any science fiction, fantasy, or horror film I would watch because you couldn't get them. So I would sit down if there was the promise of a spaceship or the promise of a monster, I would watch 2 hours of a boring slog of a movie just to get a minute of some creature showing up at the end.
Sure.
And that would teach me, you would, because there was nothing else on. It wasn't like I could click onto something else. So I would sit there and watch it. And as a kid and on Channel 11 on our independent station, they would have Sci-Fi Theater on Sundays at 2:00 in the afternoon. And it didn't matter what was on. I didn't care. I'm like, I am watching Sci-Fi Theater at 2:00 in the afternoon.
Yes.
And that's where I discovered everything from the original Byron Haskin directed War of the Worlds from 1953 to a movie called They Came from Beyond Space that's god-awful from the late 60s. It's terrible. Yeah. But I would watch it. I'd be like, oh my God, they came from beyond space. What's this about? Well, it turns out not that much. But Michael Gow, who played Alfred in Tim Burton's Batman movies, was in it. So he was the Moon Master. But I would watch all of this stuff. And you even the stuff that I didn't like, I would learn from. And I would be like, well, that sucked. But I would think, well, why did it suck?
Yeah.
And so I think nowadays, unfortunately, and then as I became the home video age, and I would watch anything. and I started going to film festivals, and I saw movies from all around the world, all different kinds of films. And I think the problem is now is that there is less diversity of storytelling. Like, people are only watching fantasy films. They're only watching Star Wars or Indiana Jones or Lord of the Rings, and that's only one type of film. And there's nothing wrong with a steady diet of that, but really stories themselves, and I'm kind of going on a roundabout way to explain this, but the reason that we tell stories in the first place is we're trying to convey within those stories that there are truths about human existence, all of our existence, that are true for everyone. You know, the idea, like at the end of Lord of the Rings, when Samwise is he says, "I can't carry the ring, Mr. Frodo, but I can carry you." You know, that moment, that's something. Now, none of us are actually going to be carrying the one ring up to the crack of doom to throw it inside.
Yeah. But
everybody understands that our friends might have a tremendous burden that they are having problems themselves coping with. And that's when we as friends come in like Samwise Gamgee and say, "Look, what can I do for you?
Yes.
How can I help you in your time of need?" And those
we learn how to be humans. We learn how to be people to each other.
That is exactly correct. And I think one of the things that I've loved as a lifelong comic reader is a character like Superman, or a character like Captain Kirk, in my case, I love Star Trek, embodies, even though he's an extraterrestrial from the planet Krypton, Superman ultimately embodies what we as human beings would all aspire to be in our own lives.
Yes.
Somebody that, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, whether you're religious, whether you're straight, whether you're gay, however you identify, whatever culture you're from, at the end of the day, you can identify with a character like Superman, because whether he stands for truth, justice, or the American way, or just the values of truth, justice, and caring and honesty, call it what you will. But the character of Superman or Wonder Woman or even Batman, ultimately, at the end of the day, they are trying to be the best human beings they can.
Yeah.
And the reason why I think they become, and why they've endured for such a long period of time, is all people, unless you're an asshole, all people can understand what that means.
Yeah.
You know, wouldn't it be great if we could all get rid of our petty differences and live lives to help one another? So all storytelling really comes down to, how do we share human experience in such a way? And what I've always marveled about in terms of movies is, you could sit in a theater, whether it's a big theater or a small theater, 200-seat theater, a 500-seat theater, a 1,500-seat theater, that people from all walks of life, from all different economic, socioeconomic, religious, racial, all different walks of life, will come into the same room, sit down in the dark with people they don't know, and they'll sit, and when that light and that projector turns on and that story is being projected, any differences you might have with your fellow man go away. And your attention, unless you're one of those douchebags who picks up your phone like, "Oh yeah, I'm in this movie right now. I'll text you or call you when I'm home."
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
I'm watching a movie right. I don't know. This is stupid.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not even understanding what's going on here. Well, I can talk.
I mean, I assume those people are in the minority.
Yeah.
We are, aren't you? But the idea that people will sit down together and have this collective experience.
Yes.
And if a movie is good, there's truths in that storytelling that transcend all of those boundaries. And like, you know, I think very few people in the world will ever get to the end of the Shawshank Redemption and not feel moved when Morgan Freeman finds Andy Dufresne, when Red finds Andy Dufresne on the beach working on his boat in Zihuatanejo. You know, that's a moment where we're all, our spirits are uplifted.
Yes.
You know, and when you're watching Endgame and you hear Sam Wilson say, "On your left," I even say that right now, and I hear that, like, I can't believe when I watch Infinity War and Endgame, which I watch way too much, I'll tell you, I can't believe those movies even exist. Even now, I've watched them. I own the hot toys. I mean, I'm like, when I was a kid, I dreamed that one day somebody would make a superhero team up like these movies. And if you asked me 20 years ago, hey Rob, do you think they're ever going to make like Avengers movies? I'd be like, no. I mean, I'd be like, bruh. I mean, they would have to like explain who Captain America is, and they'd have to explain who Thor was, and maybe Iron Man, or maybe, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to make movies about each one of those characters first, and then put them into a movie where they're all going to be together.
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to believe in a real movie that Thor and Captain America and Iron Man are going to share the screen together. Never going to happen.
Yep.
Cut to,
here
we're watching WandaVision.
Yep.
I mean, it's crazy.
We're getting into some deep stuff now.
I mean, it's so, but that's because we're now a generation of people. I mean, I'm older, but we collectively, I call it the post geek singularity over on my channel. We all live in that, where we all grew up with this material 20, 30, 40 years ago. It was not a collective experience. But over the last 30 years, because of animation, because of gaming, because of movies, we've all grown up, and we all now live in that world where people understand who these characters are, and which is kind of the problem, because everybody has their definitive notion of what that character is. Like, Batman is exactly the way he was portrayed in Batman the Animated Series. Well, I don't know. I first saw Tim Burton's Batman, and he should be just that way. So the characters are sort of
Adam West.
I mean, I grew up with Adam West.
Absolutely. And there's room for all of that, Robert, and you mentioned like the on the left thing, and I had to laugh because I was telling you before we went in, like I kind of got in trouble last night because I given what we're talking about, about Zack and the kind of the dividing line there where people, just kind of go off on these ridiculous rants. I went off on this rant last night and people took me seriously, but I brought up the whole on the left thing. I'm like, and I was kind of in character. I was just like, this on the left thing is stupid. They try to bring this thing back. All of a sudden, all these portals open and stuff, and I'm being silly. And but people are they're very passionate about these ideas and these things. So it's like, you can't even poke fun at them. And but there is a line right now between poking fun or disagreeing with something because we're passionate about, whether it be the Avengers or, DC, characters or whatever. And then there's this kind of this other thing where there's kind of this anger and this bitterness that it seems that people in the fandoms have towards each other. And Zack Snyder, recently, I mean, in your whole video this weekend, man. Well, first I do want to say shout out to Q here. Says good day with a $5 super chat. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. And then Benson's Mark is great. He's over in the UK with a £5 super chat. He loves Condor Man by Disney, and it's an ongoing joke here at the channel. He says, "Hey Nash, I'm a massive fan of Robert and his work on Superman Returns. He also has an amazing Eagles collection."
Ooh, of which I'm getting another one.
But he doesn't like Condor Man. Condor Man. He keeps Mark always brings up Condor Man, which is absolutely hilarious.
I saw Condor Man in the theater when it first opened, and
well, when Mark first brought it up, he was shocked that I knew who Condor Man was. But like I'll never get every once in a while, still to this day, I'll be walking down the street and I don't even know where it comes from, but I'll just hear that little Condor Man and whatever. And then DC Talk with extended thanks, man, for the $5 super chat. But watching your video this weekend, there were a couple of articles that came out. There's this book that's coming out about the Snyder Cut.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was contacted by that author, and I want to have him on my show. And he's going to send me a copy to read before he comes on, because I'd like to, interview him and all that. Because, the Snyder Cut is, I think, what's gone on with that, it has now become a really interesting story as far as entertainment is concerned. As far as movie making is concerned. Yes. Now, I think this quote informed a lot of my opinion about what went on, because finally you're hearing where he really was coming from. Yeah.
Because the quote, I mean, he just says here, I was kind of done with it, with why he left Justice League. I was kind of done with it. I was in this place of knowing my family needs me more than this BS, and I just need to honor them and do the best I can to heal that world. I had no energy to fight the studio and fight for the movie, literally zero energy for that. I really think that that's the main thing. I think there's a different world where I stayed and kind of tried, and I'm sure I could have, because every movie is a fight, right? I was used to that. But I just did not have the energy. There was no fight in me. I had been beaten by what was going on in my life, and I just didn't want to. I didn't care to. That was kind of where I was.
If that to me is definitive, and it's incredibly honest.
Yeah.
And I don't know Zack Snyder. I've never met Zack Snyder. And as I talked about on my show, one of the things I was most vehemently against in my whole life is somebody remaking Romero's Dawn of the Dead, because it's one of my favorite movies of all time. And I didn't know Zack Snyder. I walked into Dawn of the Dead knowing he made it, and I know of his background and things. And I was primed to hate it. I'm like, how dare you? and 10 minutes into the movie, I'm like, it was during I love the opening of the movie, but it was the opening credits. I'm like, all right, and while I didn't love it, I thought it was really good, and I felt it did not besmirch the memory of the original, and what he did was interesting, and there was and because James Gunn wrote it, I like the script, and so I go into everything wanting, in this particular case, I went in knowing I was going to hate it, and I was won over. But for the most part, I go into everything because I know how hard it is to make movies, wanting to like things.
Yeah.
But there is also, I think what people forget, especially fans forget, is we do live in the real world. There is a real world out there, and there are the realities of things like movies and television. All of this stuff is a product to be sold. People usually say, oh, they're widgets or whatever. Video games, comics, everybody who's selling something. It's like people, I remember being in high school, like, I don't like, the Cure's album Disintegration. I liked it better when they were more independent. I mean, I like Head on the Door, and now Disintegration is their bid for complete commercial success. I mean, even Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me was not so pandering. I used to hate that shit. I'm like,
God forbid that somebody be successful, Robert.
I'm like, do you think bands want to toil in obscurity? Do you think every kid who ever picked up a guitar and started a band dreams that they're going to one day be playing sold out stadiums like the Who or the Rolling Stones, or now Coldplay or U2 going on a Joshua Tree tour 30 years after the original album came out? I mean, give me a break. So I used to hate that. I'm like, Disintegration's a great album, by the way. I mean, come on, what are you bitching about? So the Cure the more people know the Cure, you think the Cure don't like that? I mean, give me a break.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but there's the business of Hollywood. Movies are very expensive to make, and they want to appeal to the most amount of people that they can appeal to. And when you listen to this quote from Zack Snyder, I can only imagine. So Warner Brothers, you're talking, Man of Steel came out in 2013, I think.
Yeah.
So Man of Steel comes out in 2013. We are now 5 years into the MCU. Iron Man 2. I don't know. When did Avengers come out? 2012? Did it come out before?
I believe so.
Here, let me look real quick. I want to check because this timeline's important. So it came out, Avengers came out 2012.
Yeah, 2012.
So imagine it makes $1.5 billion.
Sure.
Disney is almost literally across the street from Warner Brothers. The executive offices are or Alameda, and you cruise down. You can literally go from the Warner Brothers lot to the Disney lot in 2 minutes by car. So imagine you're at Warner Brothers, right? And you're a publicly held company, and you've got shareholders, and movie making is a very high risk situation at the studio level. Movies now at the studio level cost, there are very few mid-level, mid-range movies like $50 million. The Matrix in 99 was a $65 million movie.
Man.
Now that was like a mid-range movie. I mean, we didn't have $100 million movies until Terminator 2 in 1991. We've now had it's been 30 years where $100 million movies or even I remember hearing like, yeah, we're going to get Terminator 2 into theaters in 9 months and it's going to cost $100 million. And I'm like, what? Who's going to, what? I just started my career working on movies and I'm like, $100 million. The first movie I ever worked on was Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 and it cost $3 million. And I'm like, $100 million for what? Well, that's the world we live in. So movies now cost above at the studio level are costing above $100 million. And then you're spending twice that to market films.
Yeah.
So the proposition of making movies is very daunting. And the kind of returns, the idea that a movie would gross $1 billion, well, maybe if you're Titanic and Avatar, but $1 billion was like the end all be all. Well, when the Marvel Cinematic Universe, after being carefully curated and tended to by Kevin Feige and Louis D'Esposito and Vittorio Alonso and the team at Marvel, remember what Kevin Feige did, and I say this all the time, he worked on 13 different Marvel movies before the MCU. He saw what went right. He saw what went wrong. He saw what the results of studio interference could be. He saw when filmmakers were a little out of their depth. He knew exactly, because he's a big fanboy before he ever he was an imagination connoisseur before he ever was working for Marvel, on these other movies, and certainly before starting the MCU. So he basically saw what worked and what didn't work.
Yeah.
And then starting the Marvel Cinematic Universe and having a plan. That's the important thing. They had a plan. Even when it didn't work, like with Incredible Hulk, they changed things around and they moved forward. Thor: The Dark World wasn't as, say, successful for various reasons as, say, the other movies. So they make changes and they learn as they go, because Kevin Feige knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
And so does his team. So by the time you get to Avengers, and I have to say, when I was sitting in the theater in 2012 with my friends I went with, my jaw was agape going, I can't believe this movie exists. I can't believe I'm watching all of these characters in one movie and they're fighting Loki and you've got, it's insane, but it worked. So Warner Brothers, their thought was, well, hell, son, we've got this pantheon of characters that are, we're going to make $1 billion too.
Right out the gate too, man.
Well, that's the problem. They thought that, and you're thinking, well, remember the last time you made a Superman movie, you didn't make $1 billion, which was Superman Returns in 2006. And the Batman movies, you had to work up to that. You started out with Batman Begins, respectable box office. Yep. Everybody liked it. But Dark Knight, no one would have seen that the Dark Knight was going to be nearly as successful as it was based on Batman Begins box office.
No.
And then Dark Knight Rises kept the same level of box office. Of course, it wasn't as successful creatively for various reasons, but still, I watched Dark Knight Rises. It's incredibly ambitious. And a lot of it doesn't always work, and there's a lot of weird logic stuff in it, but still, it's character based. There's like, that movie's like 45 minutes before anything major really happens in it, but you're building the characters. I like all three of those movies for various reasons, but so they just expected, when Man of Steel was coming out of the gate, they had all these plans. We're going to start this cinematic universe, and they didn't. They're like, it's not going to take us 5 years to make Avengers. We're going to do it much quicker. And so this is the studio's problem. This is the kind of thinking that happens at the executive corporate level. They're like, we're going to make $1 billion. They got it into their minds. Once Avengers crossed that Rubicon and a superhero movie can make $1 billion or $1.5 billion, well, then the thinking is all superhero movies should be able to make $1 billion, right? This is the kind of Hollywood thinking that happens.
Yeah.
And at the boardroom level, and by the way, most of the people that work at the studio executive level, the highest levels, whether they're running a studio or not, are not filmmakers themselves. Now, I want to say something. Toby Emmerich, who runs Warner Brothers, is a filmmaker. He's been a screenwriter. He's been a producer and an executive producer over 100 movies, but most of that was at the time he spent it at New Line as an executive producer. But in terms of being a director, boots on the ground, Mike DeLuca wrote the script for John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. But the problem with these guys is they're still at their core studio executives, which means they're more interested in the business of the movies that they're making, because, and yet they all want to be filmmakers, all of them. They all fancy themselves filmmakers. But you know what? It's one thing to stand back and comment on someone else's work than to actually nose to the grindstone and make this stuff happen. Yeah. So at Warner Brothers, under that regime, whether it was Kevin Tsujihara and the people that were there, in their minds, we're going to make $1 billion a film. And they had an idea of what kind of a movie that they're supposed to be making. And so when Zack Snyder makes Man of Steel, I'm sure when the studio was watching it, they were over the moon. Like, oh my God, this movie kicks ass.
Yes.
I mean, and by the way, I'll say it. It does kick ass. And if you're a studio executive, and when I worked at Warner Brothers, what would happen is all of the execs, so there's the upper echelons of the studio, and then there are the senior vice presidents. And the senior vice presidents at the creative level, each are sort of in charge. They're overseeing whatever movies they're responsible for. And in the feature production division, when I worked there, there was a senior vice president that oversaw everything, which was Bill Young. And then there were executive production managers that would oversee, like there might be 5 movies made for, so 15 movies are being made at a time, and each executive production manager would oversee their movies. So there was 3 of them that would oversee 5 movies apiece. After lunch every day, and lunch in Hollywood is from 1 to 2. After lunch every day from like 2 to 4, these executives at the time, and this is a long time ago, would all go to the screening rooms and watch the dailies that came in from the day before of all the movies that Warner Brothers were making. So they would watch the dailies of the yesterday's previous shoots or wherever. So the executives were very aware of how the movies were shaping up. Now it's all done online and everything. But the point is, the way when these movies are being made, every step of the way is being overseen by the studio. They know.
Man, and it's so sad because Warner Brothers seems more so even than others, or maybe it's just because of the mistakes and kind of the negativity that's come out of it. But Warner Brothers, especially with their DC properties and other things, there's so much tampering. You know, it seems like now every DC movie that comes out, you hear some story. We just heard a story this last week from Kathy Yan about Birds of Prey, even, and you know, and it's like people are now. I mean, as soon as the Snyder Cut was announced, people immediately turned their eyes to the Ayer cut, the David Ayer cut of Suicide Squad, and wanting that because that movie is famously been, you know, cut up and torn down because
awful.
It was set, you know,
it's
and look,
I can't even watch it because of the editing in the film.
And I'll be honest.
I mean, I did watch it, but
I'll be honest with you. I like Suicide Squad. There are a lot of parts of I don't like the villains. I don't like the end, and I don't like there's just aesthetically some weird stuff. You put Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, I'm going to be smiling ear to ear the entire time. Okay.
I think a lot of the characters and the performances in Suicide Squad were a lot of fun.
Yes.
I just think what happened to Suicide Squad, there was something happening that was affecting all of these things, and it was at the studio level.
Yeah. They just meddle. It's like they can't keep I've always heard that Warner Brothers is like the studio of directors and filmmakers, and they kind of touted that. And yet I see, like, when I'm starting to look at this list of films and all this stuff that comes out, it's like, who for what directors? For what artists? Because I'm just
for Clint Eastwood.
But I guess so.
Malpazzo has been on the Warner Brothers lot for what, 40, 50 years now.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, here's what a lot of people don't understand. The people that run the executives that run the studios. Now, Toby Emmerich is pretty unique in how many movies as an executive producer he oversaw at New Line. And so he understands how movies are made, and he wrote like Frequency, and he wrote the screenplay. He wrote the screenplay. So he's better than most, but really his destiny was to run a studio. That's his job. Like Toby Emmerich is not going to go away. Like someone like, here's what normally happens to a studio executive who's good, like Lorenzo de Bonaventura, who is at Warner Brothers. Lorenzo de Bonaventura works at the studio, and then he gets a producing deal. When he leaves the studio, he gets a producing deal. He's been, first of all, he helped me a little bit. He started at Warner Brothers when I was already working there. He was always very nice to me. And then when I made my movie Free Enterprise, he watched it and gave me notes. And to see his career working on the Transformers movies, he's a guy that made the transition from studio exec to producer. Now that's the usually that's the destiny of studio executives. But a guy like Toby Emmerich, he's a captain of industry, which means he's going to be running the studio. That's his destiny, is to be a Bob Iger or an Alan Horn or something. He's going to run the studio. That's what his job is. However, a lot of the people that work at the studios, they fancy themselves filmmakers because they're at the studio. I mean, they're the gatekeepers of what movies get made. And in the case of what happened at Warner Brothers, specifically with the superhero movies that were being made, is suddenly because of what Marvel did with the paradigm shift and changing, superhero movies now cross that $1 billion Rubicon, $1.5 billion Rubicon. Suddenly superhero movies at Warner Brothers are, you've got your corporate minders, you've got your shareholders. They're like, bruh, we got Wonder Woman, we got Batman, we got Superman. Why aren't we making $1 billion per film? Yeah. So the thought at the studio is like, well, yeah, why aren't we? And so the idea was, we've got the heavy hitters. We've got Superman. Batman had already been making $1 billion over in Christopher Nolan's under his watch. So we are now people are expecting these movies to make that level of money. Yeah. Now, Man of Steel gets made. The studio's making it. They believe, as they were watching this movie take shape, that this movie is going to be $1 billion grossing film. I guarantee you that Warner Brothers was expecting, like, this movie's the shit. This battle at the end is incredible. It's everything that wasn't happening in Superman Returns. This is amazing. And from a studio perspective, they're watching this. They're watching these dailies, the performances, the visuals, everything. From the studio perspective, Man of Steel is a $1 billion movie. Now, keep in mind, the people working at the studios are not steeped in Superman lore. It would never occur to them like, well, Superman doesn't kill. I mean, come on. They don't know anything about that. All they're doing is watching from a filmmaking standpoint what they're getting and how amazing it looks. And from a studio perspective, I get it. I'm like, I would have thought it was going to make $1 billion too.
I walked out of Man of Steel, honestly. I walked out of Man of Steel thinking, oh my God, they just made the Superman movie that I've wanted to see since
my whole life.
My whole life. Since John Byrne, redid and did the Man of Steel miniseries and rebooted the entire thing. I'll tell you what, how
about the pocket universe where Superman has to kill Zod, Ursa, and Nan?
Well, I just picked up that issue this week because we talk about this stuff so much that we do these giveaways and stuff on the channel. And I was like, you know what? I saw that and I was like, oh, we got to get that because we talk about that so much that we got to give that away here on the channel. And so, yeah, there's precedent for these things. And that's why, like, anytime somebody comes at me and is like, well, you don't know Superman. I'm like, oh, come on, man. Really? I don't know Superman. Like, when's the last time you picked up a comic book? And they're like, well, comic books doesn't matter. Yeah, it does. That's where these characters come from. Look, I get it. Superman and Batman, they're in the pop culture vernacular. But we were just having a conversation about this last night on a stream. And we were talking about the fact that a lot of people, they get their knowledge of the DC characters because a lot of the Marvel people, they're steeped in the comics, like they watched the cartoons in the 90s. They had all that, but they didn't have great movies or this legacy of films or whatever. I mean, they had the cheesy, Captain America movie and whatever. But
make no mistake, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is entirely derived and inspired from comics storylines.
And that's the thing. Those Marvel fans are in that.
Yeah, but they also know that what's really interesting is, like, okay, everyone knows the best runs of whatever character. Pick a character like Daredevil. You know that, okay, you got to go to Frank Miller's Bullseye, Daredevil, Elektra, or the Born Again storyline, where Kingpin finds out Daredevil's identity and the whole thing with that. You can go. Marvel knows, like, oh, they had Ed Brubaker's entire Winter Soldier run in Captain America, which, by the way, was dope. Now, are they going to adapt the whole thing? No, but they can look at that run and go, you know what? This is a great Captain America story.
Yes.
What happens with Bucky, the whole Winter Soldier, this is awesome. It's already there. We have all the elements that we need. This is what we're going to go adapt. And so I think that's one of the key successes of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is they already know we've already got these legendary storylines for all of these characters, and go back and look at those. You know, I tweeted something last night. Allure magazine, which is a women's fashion magazine, did a piece in 2016 where they had Elizabeth Olsen running down the history of Scarlet Witch. You know, from her inception to joining the Avengers and all the way through House of M. And it's just Elizabeth Olsen explaining, in this year, this happened, and in the Vision versus Scarlet Witch miniseries. And you look at it and you're like, yeah, because Marvel, they all know what's up when they're talking. If you look at the end credits of all their movies, they're thanking all the creators that worked on whatever storyline was touched upon. They're like, oh, we looked at 5 different famous storylines to touch upon this one movie, and so we're going to credit those people. Or like in the case of they'll put in Endgame, they put Jim Starlin, who created Thanos, in a scene.
Yeah,
you know, he'll be in a scene, and they're acknowledging, because they're going back to the comics, which is, remember, same thing is true of science fiction and horror. Science fiction is a literary genre. You're never going to be able to write a great science fiction story unless you are steeped in science fiction literature. That's why I think that Star Trek, modern Star Trek, is really terrible, because and no apologies if you like modern Star Trek. I don't begrudge you for it. Please do so, because a lot of people are coming to Star Trek for the first time. I can't stand it, because as science fiction, I'm like, have you ever cracked any science fiction novel? Like, I could give you 5 science fiction novels to read, and it would make your writing on Star Trek better. I mean, we're talking canonical, the great works of the Western canon of science fiction. Just read these 5 books, and it'll make your writing better. Well, with Marvel, they do that. You know, they go back and they look at those books. Well, so Man of Steel, back to this whole Man of Steel thing, whether you, like, here's another thing I don't understand. As a comic reader, you know, I grew up reading all the Elseworld stories. There's a million different takes. That John Byrne Pocket Universe story where he does kill the 3 outlaws from Krypton because he has no choice.
Yes.
And by the way, reading the letters of comment that came in those books after that story was published, there was a lot of people going, "Oh my God, Superman can't do this," and there was a lot of this. But in that story, it examines, well, what if he did?
Yep.
And so here we are. You've made Man of Steel, and the studio. You think the studio? Even look at the trailers. Like the Comic-Con trailer, look at that extended Comic-Con trailer with that first unbelievable piece of Hans Zimmer music. You know, where you see the kid you see young Clark put his towel around his neck. And, you know, that piece of music. You're like watching that trailer. You watch a trailer and you're like, oh my God, like I'm feeling Superman in my very soul when you're watching that trailer. And so the studio thinks this, and even we thought. And same was true when you watched that first trailer for Superman Returns at Comic-Con. We all flew in from Sydney. We were in the middle of making the movie. Brian and the crew flies in on a private jet specifically to show the first trailer for Superman Returns. It was very similar to the first trailer for Man of Steel in that you look at it and go, this is going to be the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. That first trailer with Hans Zimmer's music and the imagery, and the fact that some of it looks like it's a Terrence Malick movie. I mean, it looks incredible. So the studio, everybody, this movie's going to make $1 billion.
But see, that's the thing, is so many people, like, for all the Marvel people who are steeped into comics and know these stories, and they've lived these stories because they've read these stories, they've had their nose in those books. A lot of the DC fans, like, and I was one of them. I grew up, you know, with some of this too, you know, with a lot of this. You know, they know the Super Friends on Saturday mornings, right? they know the cheesy, you know, I'm Superman, up and away, you know, like those kind of iterations. And so when they look at that, that's what they expect. That's who they expect. And for some reason we've gotten to a point where we're accepting of Batman being darker, but Superman has to be this thing. And then it's just the fact that people can't really pick, and you're not going to get a definitive thing. If you put 10 people in a room and you say, what is Superman? Who is Superman? You're going to get 10 different answers from people because they all have a different opinion about what Superman should be. Now, I like all the iterations. I can watch all of them. I still have an affinity for a special place in my heart for Superman 4 even. Okay. So I can do that.
Even I can't go there with you there. But I saw it in the theater.
Yeah, I mean, but there's moments in that because I feel that there's funny jokes in it, you know, and there's stuff because I watched it when I was a kid, and I love the scene where, you know, Clark is both Superman and Clark, and he's trying to be on a date with Lois and Lacey Warfield, and you know, he's flying all around, and it's silly and it's goofy, but it fits that time, the 80s and the you know, and all this stuff. But
by the way, you could retell that exact same movie with more money and keep the same script and make a kick-ass movie out of that.
Yes, you could. And so, you know, so I've just gotten to a point where it's, I'm kind of like that with you. I look at all this and I look at Man of Steel and I look at Zack Snyder's, you know, vision, and I just ask myself, why are people just beating this man down over him getting this cut, over him being able to finish his project? It's, you know, it's just a different version. It's just a different thing. If you don't like it, it's, you know what, one day there's going to be another thing. We've got a totally different Superman on the CW, you know, coming up. We've got all these different things. They can all exist together. You know?
Yes. I think the difference though is that I think people, it's not just that, like you were talking about, like I grew up with the George Reeves Superman show from the 50s. When I was a kid, I love that show. I love that Clark Kent was a badass. He was a burly dude that came in, and he wasn't like, oh, Lois, you know, he was like, hey, I'm Clark Kent. I'm mild-mannered reporter, but I'm the best reporter there is. You know, he was, not only was he Superman, but he would scoop everybody. You know, he was not, and you know, it was awesome. I love that when I was a kid. So you've got all these iterations. And as a comic book fanatic, like I was, whether I'm reading Superman Red Sun or whether I'm reading Superman going to Warworld and fighting Mongol, you know, or whatever, in gladiatorial combat, or whether I'm reading a Superman for All Seasons, there's so many different iterations of Superman that I've read. I looked at Zack Snyder's iteration as a new iteration. And I walked into it not expecting, I mean, the character of Superman has never quite been portrayed the way he was portrayed in Man of Steel. It's a more realistic take. Like if Superman existed right now, like forget truth, justice, and the American way. He's an extraterrestrial from Krypton that has to deal with the spillover of a war from his home planet arriving on Earth. It's a whole different take. Yeah. And the studio, and I think what's been going on and what happened with the Snyder Cut, what happened with Zack Snyder and what he was talking about battling the studio began when Man of Steel didn't gross $1 billion, and the critical response and then also the fan response to the movie started rolling in. Because the studio in their mind, they did their job. And by the way, I would say they did do their job. They did exactly, they provided from what they thought, and even my perspective, at the studio level, Warner Brothers thought they had an epic win. And they as the movie was, and everybody was like, this movie's going to kick ass. And then everything changed when it first came out, because rather than get an A in every review, every reviewer gushing or waxing rhapsodic about how great this movie was, and fans going, this is the second coming of Jesus with this movie. This is incredible. That's not what happened.
Yeah.
The film, by the way, I'm looking at the box office now. Worldwide, it grossed $668,045,518. Now, very respectable box office. Now, it did cost, according to Box Office Mojo, it did cost $225 million. No expense was spared, as you can see. But they thought that 225 million and however much they dumped into marketing was going to translate to $1 billion.
Yeah.
It did not. Now, here's the thing. The studio executives, their jobs, their one job in life. What does a studio do? It makes movies. The movies are supposed to make money. That's what they do. So from the studio perspective, if Warner Brothers releases a movie that performs below expectations, well, the studio execs can go ahead and blame the filmmakers all they want. But their corporate minders aren't going to blame the filmmakers. The corporate minders are going to blame the people running the studio, going, well, you're the people picking these people to make these movies. You're the ones marketing these movies. It's your fault if these movies fail. And if you're a studio executive and you lose, well, you might not get your production deal because you're not at the highest level. Yeah. So you're out. So the thing about studio executives, the last thing they want to do is be responsible for a failure. Now, Man of Steel was, in the eyes of the studio, a disappointment.
Yeah.
Because it didn't make that $1 billion. Now, here's the thing. It was not a disappointment in the studio's eyes until the movie got released. And this is what people don't understand. Now, even the fans, and if you read the critical response and the very divisive response among fans, I mean, I find it funny that I've been defending Man of Steel for now 8 years. And I find it strange. I think Man of Steel is a kick-ass movie. Like even that moment where Clark is floating in the ocean and the whale goes by, I'm like, yeah, that's like a Superman for All Seasons moment. You know, that was what a great, I think about it right now, I'm still getting chills. What a wonderful visual image. And look, I don't think Zack Snyder is, say, a great intellect the way that Christopher Nolan fancies himself. But Zack Snyder knows how to craft an image. You know, he thinks in terms of these images. He's not gonna sit down and give you a lecture on semiotics or something like that. He's gonna go, look at this. I'm gonna put this image on screen. It's gonna kick ass. Yeah. You know, and while he's doing it, I am sure that Zack Snyder, when he's on set, you watch him, he dresses well. He's a really fit guy. That guy probably runs around on a movie set the whole day going, this fucking kicks ass. I love this.
Yeah, you can tell that he's excited.
I'm sure that everybody on his sets, including his actors, like I'm sure he's the kind of guy at the end of a take, like if Ben Affleck did some shit, Zack Snyder's gonna go, dude, that was awesome. You know, and you'd feel I've always wanted to be on one of his sets just because I've always believed that it's got to be like that. Like, and he clearly, like I love Watchmen, the comic. It's one of my favorite things in the world. I have problems with the movie from an intellectual standpoint. However, the loving recreation, the care and the detail that was put into recreating. So I think Watchmen is a great recreation, not necessarily a great adaptation, if that makes any sense. But clearly, Zack Snyder, as a director, put his heart and soul into doing the best job he could with Watchmen. Everything that's in there, the opening credit sequence, all of the shots, the fight in the beginning with Ozymandias and oops, spoiler alert, with the mysterious assailant and the comedian at the beginning of that movie is such a loving recreation of that. You can tell that Zack Snyder is filling his movies with what he believes to be the most kick-ass shit ever. Yeah. Now as somebody who watches movies, I might not love everything he does, but I can still appreciate that dude is having a very good time making movies. Like he is not phoning it in.
Oh, for sure.
You know, and so can you imagine like the studio I'm sure when the studio was making Man of Steel and their marketing, every single person at Warner Brothers on every level was like, this movie kicks ass. and everybody's patting him on the back and like, oh my God, you know, and then the movie comes out.
Yeah.
Doesn't make $1 billion. Now, the studio executives are going to get heat. Everyone's like Monday morning quarterbacking. But the studio, who do they blame? Zack Snyder.
Yeah.
It's Zack Snyder's take. It's him. Everything. It was Zack Snyder. We backed the wrong horse for whatever reason, Zack Snyder. But they were already far down the road. You know, they had their plans. They probably had contracts. They had things they were going to do. They, like Zack Snyder was going to do these movies. You're going to do Man of Steel. You do Batman v Superman. You work up to Justice League. So this was a freight train that was already screaming down the tracks.
Yeah.
So then they start the process all over again. You know, they make Batman v Superman. Can you imagine watching the dailies come back on that movie? Like, man, all the you watch that opening scene of Batman v Superman where you watch the end of Man of Steel portrayed, but from Bruce Wayne's perspective.
What a great opening.
Oh my God. Like, even when I sat in the movie theater, I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever. Seeing Batman's perspective and setting up his whole, like you said, his whole animosity. I mean, so the same thing happens. They make, and Batman v Superman was very, very expensive to make.
Mm-hmm.
As a single movie, I mean, I would not be surprised. I think it is the most expensive movie Warner Brothers ever made. It might very well be. Wow. And that doesn't include like the Matrix movies made at the same time, but I think it probably was. Marketing and all that. And they thought, same thing. They thought Zack Snyder, okay, well, Man of Steel still good, respectable.
Sure.
But this movie, Superman, Wonder Woman, you know, Batman, Lex Luthor. This movie's going to gross $2 billion.
Yeah.
Ha ha. Take that, Avengers.
Yeah. But it's in reality, it's the second film in a new.
You know what it is? It's,
you know,
I mean, look at how much after Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America, those movies were grossing like $300 million worldwide. Those movies were not making anywhere near $1 billion because they started out very methodically. They make one Iron Man. They didn't know how much Iron Man was going to make, but Iron Man didn't cost $200 million. Yeah. You know, Iron Man was cheaper. But so with Batman v Superman, and by the way, when they're making Batman v Superman, they're basically stating that we're making Batman v Superman and we're making Justice League. All of these movies are all intertwined. You know, Man of Steel was the jumping off point, but Batman v Superman and Justice League were all part of the same, that trilogy, which is going to lead into Justice League 2, and then Superman, whatever Man of Steel 2 is going to be, which is going to be the final, you know, whatever, however that was going to work. When Superman finally was Superman. So the studio is invested. I am sure when they were seeing Batman v Superman being made, again, they're looking at the dailies, they're looking at the cuts of the movie, they're looking at all this stuff, and it looks amazing to them, but then this is when the shit started to go sideways. This is when the studio, then they're making Suicide Squad and they're thinking they're going to, and the critical establishment, and then they start second guessing, and people like Jeff Johns coming in, why not rely on Jeff Johns? Because he's a big comic book creator. But Jeff Johns is the kind of guy, he's ambitious. A lot of comic book creators are not the same kind of people that work in the studio system. Jeff Johns worked for Richard Donner. Yeah. You know, Jeff Johns wants to be a famous writer, director, producer. He's always wanted that. And I'm a fan of Jeff Johns' comic work, and I totally understand where he's going to go. But then there's just because you can write comic books doesn't mean you can make movies. So there's all kinds of wackiness that set in. And all of this wackiness is now, it's manifesting itself by second guessing. Well, you know, we're going to cut Batman v Superman because it has to be 2.5 hours. It can't be 3 hours. Right. So all of the movie that they loved, suddenly Warner Brothers, the studios, the executives, everybody at Warner Brothers, Sujihara, everybody under him, Toby Emmerich, all these people are now, we have to step in.
You gut your own movie.
And then the battles began. Zack Snyder was no longer, even as much as he is delivering, he is making the most Zack Snyder of Zack Snyder movies. He is doing everything he said he was going to do. He's bringing the visuals down. I mean, I am sure people are like, I don't know what's happening in this nightmare sequence, but it certainly kicks ass. What's a parademon? I don't know, but man, it's cool.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, why is there an Omega sign over there? And why is there giant flame? Are those volcanoes there?
What's going on here?
Why is Batman dressed like the Road Warrior? I don't understand any of this. And the studio executive's like, but it looks cool. I'm sure it's going to be awesome. And you got Zack Snyder going
off and melting his face.
Yeah, I mean, and they don't really know, but it looks so cool because I'll tell you, they actually don't really know.
Yeah,
they don't know because they're executives, they're studio executives, they're not filmmakers.
Yeah.
So they're looking at all of this stuff starts to go. Everybody starts second guessing everybody else and then at the same time, Marvel, every time they tee up a new movie, hey, Ant-Man, Ant-Man makes $500 million, 500 million.
But they get the benefit of the doubt at this point.
Well, yeah, but they're methodical. Doctor Strange, 750 million, and then you've got, Warner Brothers, they're making a Deadpool movie for $65 million and it grossed $750 million. X-Men, Days of Future Past, and Warner Brothers is scratching their heads, these executives, and then their corporate minders are like, our stock price, let's get it up there, boys. Why aren't we making, and girls, why aren't we making the kind of money that they're making it, over at Fox or over at Disney? What's up? Yeah. You got Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. Batman v Superman better make $2 billion.
Yep.
And then, of course, they're meddling. Then they're like, we can't release a 3-hour movie. Conventional wisdom tells us that, if it's not Lord of the Rings, there's no way it's going to we have to cut it down. And then same thing that happened with Superman Returns. It's like, we have to, conventional wisdom tells us that we can't. And then the studio executives step in and suddenly they know better. They'll tell you precedent, this, that, and the other thing. And and that's when things go south. That's when it all starts. And this was a gradual process. Now they're already locked in, so they have to make Justice League. They made those movies. They made Batman v Superman and Justice League. They were all, the production, pre-production, it was all kind of one, in a way, both of those movies were developed and went into production and pre-production kind of simultaneously, in a way. So you get into Justice League, and then unfortunately, when Batman v Superman comes out in a truncated version and does not make $1 billion, I mean, it still did respectable business, but not for its budget.
Yeah.
It costs it, and unfortunately, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. The executives are like, we're all fucked. We're going to lose our jobs. And then there's the At&t merger coming in, and they're like, oh shit, we have to keep everything going until this merger happens, and we all get our payouts. So it was a bad situation. It was economic, and Zack Snyder's trying to do the best thing he can. And then, of course, he has his own family tragedy, which it's not like the studio said, listen, we will stand by you. We will push the release date of this movie, and we will wait. Take the time you need because we believe in you, Zach. They didn't. They're like, there was too much money for the studio that they were going to make too much money. And so what do? Jeff Johns was not wrong. I mean, I'm going to speak on behalf of what I would, what the studios are. This is not what I think is right, but this is studio thinking. They went and got the one man. They're like, fuck it. Let's go get the guy that made Avengers. Avengers 1 and 2 collectively $3 billion at the box office.
On paper, it makes sense.
From a corporate, yes. This is the one thing. Like, if you're going to replace your director midstream, which, by the way, is the most horrific thing that can ever happen to a movie, unless a director was like gunned down in a terrorist attack or something, to replace and you had no choice, to replace a director of this kind of a film when you have, imagine, your crew, your cast, they love you because every day you're telling them, this is fucking awesome. This is great. I love what you're doing. Ben, you are amazing. And this is incredible. Your cast and crew love you. So not only are you going to replace the director, but you're replacing your cast and crew's most favorite director that they've ever worked with, because everybody's having a great time, and they know what they're making kicks ass.
And
you're going to get rid of
so jarring. That's so jarring. Real quick. I do want to say thank you to Cliff for the super chat, the $10 super chat, and also Andrew Casale earlier for the $5 super chat. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you. But yeah, I mean, it's so jarring. It would be like we've been at this stream now. You know, we're in the middle of the stream. We've been talking and everything, and then all of a sudden, it would be like all of a sudden I just like kick somebody else in.
Hello, and I'm taking over now. That's exactly how it would be. I'm Joss Whedon in this situation, coming in and destroying everything. By the way, how's it going, Rob?
Wait, who are you? we're supposed to make a movie now?
Yeah, yeah.
Look, I mean, I've already made, like, we did Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. Yeah. Are you telling me that Enosh is not running the stream anymore?
He's out of here. You know, he's done.
Out of here. I'm gonna go someplace else. I got something else I got to do. And yeah, no. It is. By the way, this is Dawson.
Hello,
I invited Dawson over. We stream a lot together, and that
was actually a very well done example of what it was like. You this is the third movie that a director is working with the same cast and crew, and they love him. And now the studio has lost. He's now become Chancellor Valorum, to put it in Star Wars terms, and Palpatine in the guise of whether it's Kevin Tsujihara or whether it's Jeff Johns or whether it's Toby Emmerich. They're like, time for a vote of no confidence. That's what was happening, and unfortunately, the tragedy in Zack Snyder's own family was the perfect excuse.
Yeah, it's so sick that you talk about the circumstance, how the studio was thinking, like what the studio thought makes sense, but like at the same time, you look at, again, the whole situation, how messed up that really is. And you mentioned something interesting earlier about BVS getting cut down by half an hour, and how it's interesting because the studio obviously didn't learn from that, because when they approached Zack Snyder and he was filming Justice League, they kept saying 2 hours, and Zack even said himself, I thought they were joking. Like, I thought they were kidding. Like, how can you make a Justice League film only 2 hours?
Well, the thing you have to understand, though, that there is conventional wisdom that for instance, there is the economic reality of how many times a movie can play during the day.
Right.
And a 2-hour movie can get that much more. And from an economic standpoint, that means it's going to show its opening weekend many more times, which means more dollars in the coffers. Now that again, but that doesn't take into consideration. See, here's what I've always believed. Every single movie is its own business. Like when you set up an independent production, if I'm going to produce an independent movie, like my film that's in festivals, Tango Shalom, which, by the way, if I can mention on the show, I found out yesterday that at the Montreal Independent Film Festival, it won Best Comedy and Best Actor. Just saying. But so when a movie like that is made, we start Tango Shalom LLC, which is its own business entity, and we go make the movie. Now, Tango Shalom, while it might be compared and contrasted to other similar themed movies like Shall We Dance, it has nothing to do with Shall We Dance. It's its own thing. But now, from a studio standpoint, when they're like, well, superhero movies are part of a genre, so then they look at what superhero movies are making, and so they have expectations based on previously existing films, but really movies are their own business. Right. And so the idea that a movie should be 2 hours, that's based on a business paradigm, but it's not based on the movie that you've made, because the movie, it makes sense. Like, I'm sure with the Lord of the Rings movies, Peter Jackson, because he knew he was doing the extended versions, made the theatrical versions the best they could be, because it gets the point where it's true. You making a movie beyond 3 hours is actually irresponsible to a certain extent. Unless the only way you get, and even if I ran a studio, I'm like, no, we're not making 3-hour movies here, sir. We're not.
Sure.
But if you've got a movie like a Justice League or like Batman v Superman, that's the kind of movie that you would make an exception for.
Exactly. And the thing is with that, you mentioned the smart business model of having it 2 hours in the theater. And the thing with BVS that I always find interesting is that, again, they took out the half an hour, which adds so much to the plot, adds so much to the build-up, and helps you understand the reasons behind Lex Luthor's actions. And so when people see those things missing in the theaters, less people go and see it because they see the reviews and people say, "Oh, it's a chopped up story mess," and so it's a double edged sword.
And you're 100% right. And I would say that's why you have to think of each movie itself. Forget other superhero movies. You have to look at that particular film. This is the business. This is our business that we're building. I don't care what other businesses have done.
Exactly.
And we're looking at this. Each film needs to be looked at unto itself. And in the case of, like you just so eloquently put it, sometimes when you remove things from films, they are less engrossing because you're not as invested intellectually and emotionally into the story that's being told. Now, I have mixed feelings about Batman v Superman. I think it's a little bit overstuffed, and I would like to have seen a movie, that spent a little bit more. I would have liked to have seen more civilian interplay between Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne clashing. I think I understand what they were going for. But I think that the ultimate version of that film is way better than the theatrical release. And I have to say, that movie evokes a feeling. Again, this goes back to Zack Snyder's visual style. There is a mythic nature to Batman v Superman. There's a feeling that you get, not unlike looking at Alex Ross's paintings, where you do feel that there's certain images in that, like that warehouse scene when Batman, when Alfred flips him off the bat wing into that warehouse, that whole fight was mythic. And you finally see Batman for the very first time in a movie, in a fight with a bunch of dudes, the way even in the Nolan films,
where he's not like this, he's like,
there's not a fight.
Fighting.
I mean, this is a real knockdown, drag out brawl that we've never
bust out the bat skates and skates around and has a hockey stick.
And that fight was mythic, if that makes any sense. And there's images of Superman as well, the really mythic imagery that right out of Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns.
Like when he's floating in space and the sun comes around and he absorbs it. Like again in Dark Knight Returns, he absorbs the sun from the flowers and everything. Very symbolic. And that's something that Zack Snyder always goes for. Like you were talking about Man of Steel earlier, how there's some stories where Superman has to kill Zod, and Zack Snyder's approaching it like a mythological story between Greek gods, where in the end one of them has to go because the other's just not going to stop.
Yeah, no, and that's something that you cannot take away. You cannot not remember that. That's something that's definitely a part of his filmmaking style, and that's absolutely what he's going for.
Right.
As we like to say around here. Exactly.
But I think so in sort of this roundabout way, I mean, I tried to explain it the best I can. And for those of you who might be industry insiders watching this, yes, I do understand that I've kind of oversimplified this. And there's a lot of other things that come into play. But basically, the studio feels that they've gone down the wrong path. And the audience response has been very divided. The critical response, look, when you make a movie like Man of Steel and you've watched the entire thing and you think you've got a movie that's going to make $1 billion, and they did think the same thing about Batman v Superman, it's very disheartening when it comes out, because you think the studios want to release a movie that isn't beloved. The studios want to make a film that everybody loves.
Well, unless they're talking about Justice League.
well, no, I mean, but that's the thing, and so Justice League was the casualty,
right?
Justice League was the no confidence vote of the studio, combined with the tragedy of what happened in Zack Snyder's own family, both, and then all of these people behind the scenes who are, let's face it, Zack Snyder was done dirty by a bunch of opportunistic people that some of them wanted to cash out because of the AT&T deal. Some people were wanting to ride in like the White Knight, like Jeff Johns, and become, if this works out, then my status at the studio becomes elevated. Do I begrudge somebody like that? No. Everybody wants, we're talking the corporate cutthroat. It is not show friends. This is show business, man. What Bob Sugar said and Jerry Maguire, it has never been more true than what happened at Justice League at Warner Brothers. I mean, it's all like, everybody's like, we have to get our own, and I'm going to get my AT&T money, and I want to become Joe producer of these giant movies, and blah, blah, blah. No one at the time was thinking, everybody was thinking, I'm gonna save this ship
Yeah.
that's going down.
They were
I mean,
thinking, I'm going to turn this into the MCU, and then they said, well, basically the ends justify the mean, and the mean was, lying to the cats, saying, talking about Joss Whedon being chosen by Zack. Like, we've even talked to cast members on my show that have told me, like, yeah, no, we learned that was a bold-faced lie.
oh, dude, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine. You've taken this beloved director in Zack Snyder, a guy who's like a kid in a candy store who probably makes going to work every day a joy. Now, by the way, not knowing Zack and not having been on any of his sets, I could be completely off base on this. I don't know.
Well, I will point out, though, you did point out something about Zack Snyder, how being on set, he's probably like, dude, this is awesome. In fact, there was an interview with Gerard Butler talking about 300, This Is Sparta scene. Where
Right.
he did the obnoxious take, which ended up being in the film, and he goes to Zack, he's like, that was over the top, and he's like, no, dude, that was perfect, that was awesome. Like,
yeah, and and by the way, it was, and Zack Snyder was right.
Yeah.
Sometimes actors, sometimes when you give actors a direction, like I always find that to be if you have a really great actor and you're working with him on set or her, and one of the joys of that is you always want an actor to surprise you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like when you're sitting in a casting session, you're hoping that some actor is going to walk in and blow you away. That's what you want. You want them to take what's on that page and make it their own in a way that you hadn't even considered, or that you laugh or you're overjoyed. You want an actor through their own instincts or whatever to do something that you didn't expect, that you realize they've just now plussed whatever it was you had there. They've made it. And so that when he goes to Gerard Butler, hey man, just to see what happens, just go over the top.
Yeah.
I mean, you already think you're at 100%. If you can, give me 120%. I know it might not work. And I think a great director, this is one of the secrets of being a great director. It's like being a conductor in a symphony. Everything around you is an instrument. The actors are instruments. All your crew people are instruments. If you go to an actor and you're like, okay, and the actor, you've developed a bit of a trust, a bond, because an actor has to trust you to listen to this note because they want to feel like they're protected as well. Actors have to know that if they do something too over the top, that you'll pull them back and that you'll give them an opportunity. And if they do go over the top and it's great, they also need to believe in you when you say that was awesome.
Yeah.
So and as a director, you need to develop that rapport with an actor so you can go either way, so they can trust you and they know that they're in good hands, because actors don't know. They're doing everything they can, but actors want to be directed because they want that reassurance.
Yeah.
If you leave a director out, if you're a director and you leave your actors out in the middle of the ocean floundering, and they don't know that they're giving you a great performance, or they don't know, this is not good for the actors, which means it's not good for the crew either, and it's not good for your movie. But if you have an actor that you've developed a rapport with and they trust you, it changes the whole tenor of a set.
Right. It's like when I got to witness Ethan Hawke on the set of Good Lord Bird, the show on Showtime. You could easily tell it was a very good relationship between the director and Ethan Hawke, because seeing there on the set, there was in the last episode, or the second to last episode, there's this little moment where I got to watch them film it, where he did this take like 6 different times. It was basically the same idea, but approaching it different ways, like very emotionally, like pointing at people, like changing with the lines sometimes. And you could tell there was that trust there, to where like they said at the end, that's exactly what we wanted, and it works. And they try to make it to where he could improvise and do his own little things, and they showed that trust towards him as well. Yep.
And that's when you get the best work.
Yes.
And that's why, great directors are doing those kinds of things. You have you have to have a very micro relationship with your actors, and then a macro relationship with your crew at the same time.
Yeah.
And to be a great director, it's very, very difficult, but very rewarding. And when you have somebody that can do both, as you witnessed yourself, you see how that process works. And so when Zack Snyder said that, and Gerard Butler was like, all right, dude. And he's like, no, man, that was, and Gerard Butler can see it in his eyes. Actors know if the director is bullshitting you, actors know. But then if they see it, if they see the glimmer in your eyes, actors like, oh, I guess I'll believe you then. All right.
They become a cheerleader. They become somebody who's inspiring you to do better. You're pulling that performance out of that person, and you're getting them to give their best. And even then, like you said, go above and beyond, and give the performance that's needed for that piece. But so now we're at this point where there's all this tension between Zack Snyder and the studio. And even so much now that even though, yes, HBO Max is responsible for the Snyder cut, you have things that like really appear to the average person to be very petty in the fact that, say, for example, when the date was announced for the Snyder cut, March 18th, you've got At&t shouting out saying, hey, way to go. Snyder cut's coming. You got Warner Media. Hey, shout out. Way to go. Snyder cut's coming.
Which is all their new corporate.
Yeah. You got
minders.
Everybody shouting it out. Silence from Warner Brothers.
They did one retweet eventually, but yes, absolute silence.
Yeah,
but you have to.
I get it. But it's just, it's like, you guys are adults, right? Like, and then
you guys,
Kevin Feige doing an interview going, yeah, these things that we're going to be doing on Disney Plus, where they're these what ifs, they're cul-de-sacs. They're not going anywhere. They're not really that important. What we really want to focus on is, the Winter Soldier stuff. That's just, that's just over here. It's really disheartening as a fan. Like, look, whether or not, because like Benson.
By the way, Kevin Feige would never do that.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
He would never do that, and that's why that what the great success. You know what I love about Marvel, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They know what they're doing.
Yes, I have to admit
they know, and
it's an
all
organized
of them
studio, and they know what they have their ducks in a row.
They know what they're doing. They've got their ducks in a row, and it's so funny to me because people look at Marvel and they're like, "What's the secret to Marvel's success?" And I'm like, they know what they're doing. No one else does. And I'll tell you, the proof's in the pudding. No one in the history of Hollywood has ever known what they're doing. William Goldman wrote a book. He's famously said, the screenwriter of like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He wrote a book called Adventures in the Screen Trade. And the biggest quote in that book that everybody remembers is that in Hollywood, no one knows anything. That is true. The first person who does know everything is Kevin fucking Feige. And until people understand that, and by the way, how much more evidence do you need? You've got 23 movies with a collective an average gross of $1 billion a film. You made a show called WandaVision that even fans are poo-pooing until episode 4. And now people, all they're doing is speculating on the internet. Oh my God. And it's like, even fans, 3 episodes in, I don't know, what is this? Yep. It's too slow. I don't know what's happening. 2 minutes into the 4th episode, you're like, holy shit.
Oh, wait, what's going on here?
I mean, it's and that's the thing. No one knows anything. True. Kevin Feige does. Kevin Feige, Louis D'Esposito, and Victoria Alonso, his major domos, his second and third in command, whatever. And that's what, look, whether the Marvel Cinematic Universe is your favorite thing or not, I understand. I know you might not like Captain Marvel. I get it. I understand not every movie's perfect, but Captain Marvel grossed $1 billion. And it's like, it ain't show friends, it's show business. And there's a reason why Captain Marvel grossed $1 billion, because a lot of people, especially a lot of young girls who grew up, their first Marvel movie was Captain Marvel, because you got a cat and Captain Marvel in it. And suddenly it's their favorite movies. Mothers and daughters. I even said this before the movie came out. I said, you're going to have mothers and daughters going to their first superhero movie over and over again. And you know what? The problem is everyone else is like, we're going to do a shared cinematic universe over at Universal, the dark universe with all of our famous monsters, and Tom Cruise is going to star, and we're going to get Alex Kurtzman to do the Mummy and kick it all up. Well, look at that. You know why? Because Alex Kurtzman doesn't know much.
Yeah.
And that's why it doesn't work.
You have to have a studio who has everything organized. You have everybody on the same page, which obviously with Warner Brothers, that's obviously not been the case over the past 3 decades, right? I mean, yes, you had the Dark Knight trilogy, which was very successful and brought the Batman character back into the limelight as far as a serious character. But other than that, with DC characters, I mean, we've seen, again, even further back than 3 decades, Warner Brothers has had mixed ideas. They've had too many cooks in the kitchen. They've had too many people conflicting on what they want to do. And so it's created an environment where consistency isn't possible. And so that's why a lot of people are really happy about AT&T and HBO Max coming in, because that provides an alternative. Which, to be fair, like, if they continue on with the Snyderverse with AT&T and HBO Max specifically, who's to say if they'll be able to handle it right? But at least it's not Warner Brothers at this point. Because
see, I have to say that even the streaming services, like right now, I don't think Zack Snyder is going to go back to Warner Brothers, because he's got a great thing going at Netflix. You know, his Army of the Dead has already become a franchise. There's a prequel, there's an animated series. They are, and obviously there's a prequel and an animated series because they like what they see. And here's the thing about streaming services. The difference, this is a huge difference between streamers and studios. The studios like Netflix, I mean, the streamers, pardon me, studios like Warner Brothers, for them, it's a crapshoot. You know, they don't know what their box office is going to be. And they have to spend sometimes double the budget of their film on marketing, which means the return they have to get on the pressure to get that money coming back into their coffers by every movie's got to be $1 billion grossing film now. The streamers, they don't have that problem.
Yeah.
You know, they go to Zack Snyder, you know, we're happy to have you. Michael Bay, you're going to make 6 Underground with Ryan Reynolds. Terrific. Here's how much money we're going to spend. There's no box office pressure. We're not going to spend twice as much as the budget to market this movie. What we want is a Ryan Reynolds, Michael Bay movie. We'll pay you for it. We'll pay you well, and go make that movie. And then it now how they calculate success is their subscribers. And then the reason they're never going to give really their like how much did somebody watch this movie? Because if they want to make another Michael Bay movie and it's really wildly successful, they don't want to have to pay him double what they paid him on the first. But the thing is, they pay off, and there's no pressure to perform, but they still have their analytics. But they know that Netflix passing 200 million subscribers, whatever movie is on their shelf, and imagine that everything that's on Netflix, you're walking down the canned vegetable aisle of a supermarket. All of everything that's on Netflix is like a can. You put the can up on the shelf, and sometimes more cans will be more popular than others, and you replenish them. But eventually, all of those cans are going to sell to somebody.
Yeah.
And so that movie is going to be on Netflix. People are going to jump around on Netflix forever.
Right.
And once the money has been spent, they don't have to write off a loss if it takes a bath at the box office.
Right.
You know, it's the whole not to get in, this is a much more in-depth conversation to have, but the economics of streamers is way different from the economics of the studios.
Right.
And one of the big problems is a guy like Toby Emmerich is basically, in a way, fighting for his life right now because he wants to be relevant. He would love it. He wants to come over and run things for AT&T, because right now the guys running AT&T are above him, and they have more say. And here is a guy who's a lifer studio dude who's rising the ranks. He's at Warner Brothers, goes from New Line to Warner Brothers, and becomes the head of the studio. He was going to be there, but now suddenly AT&T buys everything, and he's now fighting for relevance above all the he's below all the AT&T execs. Yeah. So his whole thing is, I need to make myself relevant. He was the architect behind the day and date releases in 2021 of putting out movies theatrically and day and date with HBO Max, because we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and he's hoping maybe that strategy will pay off. He desperately wants to keep his position, and he's really fighting for his life.
Yeah.
Now, because the streamers, to be honest, they don't need this. At the streamers, they'll make a deal they get a Zack Snyder in. We got the guy who made all these movies. Awesome. They have their creative staff, and the creative staff's like, here's your money. Go make your cool shit. That's what we want you to do. They're not going to fight filmmakers. They don't have to fight the battles that you have to fight with these studio executives who are every single day they're fighting. The studio executives are thinking, is this the last day of my tenure at the studio? You know, and that's why it's a whole different vibe. You know, studio executives think they're still Louis B. Mayer and all that, where the streamers are like, fuck it. You know, we like these, we like you. Go make that movie, and as long as you like the old guard comes back with Charlize Theron, everyone's like, well, that turned out well. You know, Netflix is just on an uptick, and Apple's like, these streamers have the money to throw at creators to go make these prestige shows, and they're not sitting there writing. They're like, we don't know how to make movies. We like your track record. You brought something in. It's a really impressive project. Here you go. Let's go make this.
And so with that being said, I have to ask, so of course the AT&T being in charge, they of course, I don't know about all licensing and stuff, if that all sticks primarily to Warner Bros., but what is the possibility, in your own opinion, of if the Snyder Cut is successful in HBO Max in the eyes of AT&T and HBO Max, of them wanting to continue his second and third Justice League film strictly on HBO Max?
Well, I think that's definitely a possibility, but the real question is, you have to, does Zack Snyder even want to do that? He's now got a situation over at Netflix where they're like, hey man, we love having you here. We love Army of the Dead. We love that. Can't wait to do this animated show, and we'll do this prequel. It's going to be rad. What else you got? We are in the Zack Snyder business for the long term. You know, and while we as fans, like, I would love to see the Justice League continue. Zack Snyder has got to do what is right for him. And right now he's at a place where, from what I understand, and again, I don't know him, and nor do I know anybody who knows him. This is all speculation on my part based on working in the industry for a number of decades. But I would assume when you're loved, and people are showing you a lot of love with your projects and your creative endeavors, you go where you're loved.
And you can also say the same thing, though, about because we've seen how AT&T and HBO Max have been very active in promoting the movie on social media and such. So you could make that same argument for HBO Max, saying like, hey, we love what you're doing, Zack Snyder, continue here. So, I mean... Yeah,
but he still had to deal with the hell of
true
of everything else, and who knows what's gone on behind it. What I would say is, and HBO Max is still Warner Brothers,
but if they can promise him like, hey, we won't mess with your stuff if you finish it out, maybe if they made that promise.
That's true, and again, it all comes down to performance,
of course,
and I think that, you know, it's a guy like Toby Emmerich. The powers that be at Warner Brothers, the studio, not AT&T, if this Snyder Cut is wildly successful, what that is basically saying is that these studio executives, they fucked up.
Yep. I loved it when you said that this weekend. Yeah.
They fucked up. And that's why people are like, imagine, you know, they put Justice League out, they did what they could, they hired Joss Whedon. Again, from a spreadsheet point of view, everything that they did for Justice League should have worked out. It's 2 hours. We hired the guy who made Avengers. We made it funnier and less dark. We did all of these things that the conventional wisdom told us should have worked.
We CGI'd Henry Cavill's face.
Well, that was the dumbest shit. I mean, that was that alone should have told you everything you need to know about the project. But so it shows what a monumental fuck up that cost the studio hundreds of millions of dollars. And by the way, this fuck up goes back to Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad and Birds of Prey. It is a monumental fuck up.
Hence why you said that Toby Emmerich doesn't want it to succeed, because again, it reflects on him and what the studio did negatively, of course.
Yep. And then the question is, well, like, bruh, why'd you do that? And the thing is, let me be clear. Toby Emmerich is a very respectable man in the industry. He has an incredible track record of producing movies. He knows what's up, but he was a guy who wanted to run a studio, and his decisions that he was making was based on his position at Warner Brothers. He was trying to do the best he could for the studio. He was erring on the side of the studio. and he was trying to do what he thought was best. However, he was throwing a filmmaker under the bus while doing it. They did the same thing to David Ayer. They were second guessing things because they thought they'd made all the right decisions. They thought Man of Steel was going to make $1 billion. They thought Batman v Superman was probably going to make $2 billion while these things were happening, because they also, unlike Kevin Feige, who does know, the studio doesn't know. A lot of studio executives don't know the difference.
Yeah,
they don't know the difference. That's why you won't wind up with the Amazing Spider-Man and the Amazing Spider-Man 2. That's why Sam Raimi for Spider-Man 3 ends up fighting a studio that you have to put all these things, and we want this and we want that.
Put Venom in the movie, and he didn't even want Venom.
Yeah.
Nope. And suddenly, what's interesting is when there's more money involved, the filmmakers who succeed at first, they're like, "Yeah, we got to have you come back." But then the studio, everybody wants to take credit for the success, so everybody's throwing in their 2 cents, and it's like, when the fuck have you ever made movies? I understand you run the studio, but why don't you just step back? You know what a great producer does? A great producer, like Kevin Feige, will be like, you know what? The Russo brothers, I think they're really talented. I watch the way they direct certain TV episodes, and I'm like, these episodes are really the paintball episode. This is a great episode of TV. And so what does he do? He finds new talent that he knows they're going to be like, you want us to make did I hear you right? You want us to direct a Captain America movie? Why, yes, I do. I've noticed that your television directing is amazing. Now, we have an infrastructure here. We have a whole way of doing things. But what I need, is that unique special sauce that you bring. We've already got the mechanism that we know we're going to get these movies made. You don't have to worry. We're going to carry you guys. We're going to make sure that everything moves smoothly. What I want from you is I want you to concentrate on what you do best, which is direct. Don't worry about this. Same thing with James Gunn. James Gunn, he makes a $3 million movie like Slither. No fucking studio like Warner Brothers is going to be like, hey, man, we should hire James Gunn to do our next $150 million franchise picture. They can't, because they don't know. Kevin Feige, he knows. Yeah. He knows. I'm going to hire James Gunn. He's done Slither and Super, but I'm going to hire him to come in here, and we're going to have him do Guardians of the fucking Galaxy, man, and we're going to make it work.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you. When I first saw it, I've never been more wrong in my life. I've admitted to it. My wife still teases me to this day about Guardians of the Galaxy, because I remember sitting in the theater watching the trailer for that the first time and thinking, okay, this is the one. Marvel's gone too far. If people hated on Man of Steel and all that stuff, then oh my God, watching a talking raccoon and a talking tree, Marvel is going to get blasted for this. And then I went to go see the movie, and I'm like, good God,
it's probably my favorite Marvel one. It probably is.
I'm like, this is hilarious. This is done so well. It's like I keep hating on the Eternals because I just don't care about the Eternals. I don't.
Oh my God, I can't wait. I'm so excited.
And I know, but like there's probably nothing else right now that like I really don't care about other than the Eternals, and I keep being scared about that because every time that I want to say, like, situation. All of a sudden here's going to come the Eternals, and you're going to see me on here in a couple of years going, oh my gosh, did you guys watch the Eternals? That was amazing.
Can I just point out, have you been paying attention to the movie Nomadland?
No.
Okay. Let me give you a little. So Nomadland is a movie that stars Frances McDormand about a woman who kind of falls out of society and becomes driving around, becomes a nomad, people that live in campers and stuff like that. It's getting all kinds of Oscar buzz. Her performance is getting Oscar buzz. The film is considered one of the best of the year. Guess who directed that movie? Chloe Zhao. Well, guess what Chloe Zhao also has coming out that she directed based on her pitch to Marvel? The Eternals. So Kevin Feige might have an Oscar-winning director who could win an Oscar for Nomadland this year. Now, I'll be eating
my words apparently in the next couple of years.
Now that's maybe Marvel will have some, but the point is that Kevin Feige hired Chloe Zhao probably based on Nomadland or something. So once again, I mean, I look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, here's the thing. I get it if fans don't love what I don't know what people are expecting from Marvel, but all I can tell you is I never thought that I would have to have Hot Toys figures of Marvel Cinematic Universe characters. This is, by the way, Thanos.
Yeah, that's
making
a beautiful piece.
He's snapping his fingers. I have not put the batteries in the Infinity Gauntlet yet, but I never thought that I would be or loving the Marvel Cinematic Universe as much as I did. And when people say that, perhaps you don't get the visceral thrill of Heath Ledger's Joker. None of the characters go that far, but I'll tell you how much between the actors they hire to play these characters, the design of the characters, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, for me as a lifelong comic book fan, is kind of a triumph. And watching WandaVision after episode 4, I'm like, WandaVision is a sequel to 2 Thor movies, Captain Marvel, Ant-Man. It's a prequel to Spider-Man: Far From Home, because J. Jonah Jameson, I think, as I suspect, because Spider-Man: Far From Home takes place 8 months after the snapping is reversed, and WandaVision takes place 3 weeks afterwards. So whatever happens in WandaVision, I will bet results in J. Jonah Jameson showing up at the end of Far From Home. So they were planning this from the very beginning, and it's like knowing. Look at what WandaVision has done, and it's a sequel and it's a prequel and it's so tied in. Look at how well thought out all of this stuff is.
And that's why, no matter some of my opinions on like some things in the MCU, like for example, the way they handled Hulk in Endgame or something like that, like small grievances that I'll have, I'll always admit that Disney did a great job of just providing a consistent viewing experience for Marvel fans and the fans of those characters. I mean, sure, like, again, we'll disagree with some things they do with some certain characters because we have our own perspective on them. But again, they provided a consistent product that has provided consistent entertainment for fans of varying degrees, and have also, in ways, made new fans of people in the general audience.
Yeah, well, I would also say this. Like, we saw Hulk smash in the first Avengers. We've seen that. And everybody wants to keep seeing that. But what they did with Smart Hulk and Professor Hulk or whatever was something new. It was something different. And we'll see Hulk smash again. And just like when Thor gets, like, one of the great things about Endgame is you see Thor in the beginning of that movie when he finally takes Thanos' head off, and you see how he feels about it. Watching Thor in the state he's in, and he turns into Fat Thor, we like Thor so much, we want him to kick ass that we don't like what was done there. And I understand a lot of people don't like that direction, but you know what? It's still entertaining.
Yeah.
I find it annoying. I'm like, I don't want to see Fat Hulk, but I mean, watching Korg in there playing video games with him while he's drinking beer, it's like,
hey mate,
it's all wildly entertaining. And then by the end of the movie, when he gets his mojo back and shows up with, Stormbreaker and kicks ass, that they're gonna, and then leaving with the Guardians of the Galaxy, by Thor: Love and Thunder, he probably had like him and Peter Quill were working out on the ship, and they'll do some montage where they finally got back in shape, which will be hilarious and funny. But we've got Thor back the way we want him, and all of it then becomes part of this continuum of entertainment. And I do have a quick
theory on that, him being back in shape. So there's this thing called, I don't know if it's actually called this, but I call it the fat man getting healthy complex, where like if someone is like really unhealthy for a while, like for example, Fat Thor, and they get really healthy, they get really fit, they also become uber confident in their body. And you've seen the set photos for Thor: Love and Thunder. He's wearing like the sleeveless white shirt, the sleeveless rocker jacket. Like, this is probably gonna be a more full of himself Thor than we've ever seen.
Right.
Just because that transformation. Anyway, I just thought that was a funny thing to mention.
No, you're probably right too. And he finally, I mean, they defeated Thanos and they got everybody in the universe back. That's like the biggest victory anyone has ever had. Of course, they lost people in the process. Right. But I think, you're right. But all of that, it's so funny to me when people are like, well, I don't like what they did with Hulk and you don't have to. but it's like it was new and unique, you know. And Thor got that, or Hulk got that moment where he snapped his fingers with the Infinity Gauntlet and got to do something, you know, really heroic. And Fat Thor was you demoralized him, and it's a character arc, and it becomes more resonant because it is more meaningful. If Thor's just Thor the whole time,
I will say that scene in Endgame with Thor and his mother when he goes back in time was fantastic.
Fantastic. It's fantastic. And it's again, you have a little bit of a humorous thing with a little jab from his mother, but it all works. That's why I think what people forget about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we as fans might want to see something of I don't know, make them more serious or whatever. But if you watch Endgame, the amount and different kinds of entertainment that both movies, Infinity War and Endgame, delivers is so spectacular. And the end of that movie, you've got Steve Rogers seeing Peggy, you know, getting together with Agent Carter at the end. I mean, we get romance, and you're crying at the end of Endgame because Captain America is with his one true love for the very first time, and they get to live out. I mean, the way those movies take you through 10 different kinds of storytelling. This kind of entertainment is very few and far between in large scale fantasy epics.
Absolutely agree. I think the one problem though with many fans when it comes to MCU and DCEU is that since Marvel's done this one thing, and again we've discussed how well they've done it to a very extensive extent, but they expect the exact same thing out of the DCEU, out of a universe that's incredibly different.
Yeah.
And therefore, when the DCEU doesn't do that, which again, we've talked about how a lot of that is due to in part to the studio meddling in and everything, then they say, oh, DCEU sucks, MCU is great, which MCU has done a fantastic job. But at the same time, like as fans, we have to learn to understand the differences and appreciate the differences of the franchises with the bumps in the road that they've had.
Well, yeah, like I have to tell you, when I was watching Aquaman, I felt like I was 8 years old. And I could not believe
that final shot of him coming out of the water.
Oh, but just the battles, like dudes on armored sharks and seahorses. I'm like, I don't even know how James Wan has been allowed to get away with this. I felt like I had chopped up cotton candy like Tony Montana snorting cocaine, and I'd hoovered up a bunch of fatty rails of cotton candy, and my head was going blah, 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 watching most of Aquaman, and I loved every minute of it. I could not believe just the sheer fantasy goofiness of the whole thing. I loved it. I loved it because it was so out there.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm now supposed to believe in a DCEU with all of these creatures on Earth, and it's the same place that Superman and Batman are hanging out, like knowing Gotham is Gotham. If Ben Affleck ever comes back, and he is coming back, I mean, I can only imagine him making cracks about, well, I'm glad I'm not at the bottom of the ocean dealing with the crap you have to deal with, you know, Arthur.
And it expanded the world so much. Like, Man of Steel BVS, we see like all the human aspects and Superman, but then Aquaman comes in, like, holy crap, there's so much more to explore.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like that new Invasion trailer that shows clips of Justice League, you know, when you can finally see Steppenwolf in action.
Yeah.
That shit was dope, man. I'm like, we've got Aquaman, and now we have this cool Steppenwolf that looks way better.
And now it's confirmed to be rated R for language and violence. Like, dude.
Yeah, and I'm like, wow, you know, and I think that
this thing is such a grand scheme. You know, you're talking about Marvel having a plan, you know, and being able to systematically do this. I feel like there was this plan for the DCEU, but because, like we talked about earlier, Robert, you know, like because it didn't just come out the gate making $1 billion a movie,
and even though the first three movies made more than first DMC movies,
exactly, but because it didn't, but because in their minds, for you know, in their minds, it's Superman, it's Batman, so they should make more money than an Iron Man and a Thor and a Captain America, and you could make that argument, but in reality, you're still starting a new series. You're introducing a new version of characters. And so you have to earn that. You have to build that up. And I really feel like if they had allowed that to happen, you know, maybe if the tragedy didn't happen to Zack and, you know, and he would have been able to stay the course and it wouldn't have given them the option and the out to then, you know, take the movie back and do something different with it. But that's where you start getting this discombobulated stuff. And I'm really interested to see when we actually sit down and watch the Snyder Cut, what's there.
Well,
right? Because if we sit there, we watch that and that blows us away and we're like, oh my God, this is 4 hours. I mean, you're talking basically 2 hours of a movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're talking two movies almost. So if we sit down and we watch this and we go, man, this is coherent. Look where this was going. Look what was happening here. Then you got to go, okay, it wasn't for a lack of a plan. Now, if we sit down and watch the Snyder Cut, and I'm just being honest with you, so nobody come at me. But if we sit down and watch the Snyder Cut and we go, okay, that was interesting. I'm glad I saw it. It shows me what his vision is. I'm happy that we've raised over $500,000 for suicide prevention. I'm glad that we've been able to help people and do things with this movement. You know what? I'm at peace now. Thank you, Zack, for your work. Go ahead and go to Netflix, do your thing at Netflix, and we're all happy now.
Yeah.
But I have this feeling that we're going to get really stirred because if this is really good, and then it's very frustrating for the DC fan to look at this and go,
especially we see like payoffs for things like, for example, a lot of people are really confused by the nightmare scene in BVS. They're like, what the heck's happening here? Like you guys mentioned before, like what's with the Omega symbol? What's with these parademons? What's going on here? And then we actually get payoff for that in Zack Snyder's Justice League. And it's just like, it's almost like this is how storytelling is done, where you tease things and then answer some questions later on. Who'd have thunk, right?
Oh my gosh, Dawson! You know what? I do this to my friend Johnny when he starts making sense. Man, I'm just gonna have to mute you because if you start making too much sense, you're gonna throw people completely off. And
well, I mean, look, I will say this: the real problem, of course, with all of this stuff is you don't have. And we say this all the time. There's no Kevin Feige. There's no Kevin Feige at Warner Brothers, and like Kevin Feige is running this incredible empire of Marvel, where he is the top dog. He's the visionary, and he steps forward, and he doesn't have to be He's not egomaniacal about it. He doesn't have to be, because I've always believed that, especially in the entertainment business, everybody wants to talk. It's all about ego. And I've always said, you know what? Let the work that you're doing be the locomotive, and you're the caboose, and let your work be the locomotive that pulls you down the track. And if your locomotive is strong and powerful, and the work is good, you can take that caboose wherever you want to go. If that caboose wants to lead you want to date hot actresses, it will, because the work's been done. If you want to make more work, the locomotive will take you there too. Wherever you want to go, that locomotive, but you have to make sure the work is what's up. Because then you're golden. No one can take anything away from you.
Right.
But everybody in Hollywood, they all want to get out in front of the work. They're all like, I got to put my name on the IMDb right now. Like, hey, bro, why don't you wait till the movie's done and then put your name on the IMDb? Like
it's like them announcing every DC solo movie before the movies are even. I mean, like literally, we get Batman v Superman,
and then it's only setting up fans for disappointment.
We're going to make this movie and the Aquaman movie.
They want that stock price to go up. They want people to talk about it. I'm like, this is wrong. And hey, when's that Flash movie coming out? How long? How many directors have you had? And it's because they are scrambling. Look, you never get successful in Hollywood following a trend. You get successful setting trends. That's what they did at the MCU. And that was because Kevin Feige worked on 13 different Marvel movies before the MCU started. He saw what worked. He saw what didn't work. He saw what studios did. He saw what they didn't do. He figured it out. And like I said, he's the only person who knows. and Victoria Alonso and Louis D'Esposito. And you can't take away from his two lieutenants, there's that core team, but it's led by Kevin Feige. And they know what's up. And they're making these bold decisions, and they're planning, and they know what works. At Warner Brothers, there's nobody other than there's the studio executives. Jeff Johns will tell you he knows, but he doesn't know enough about producing movies yet. He doesn't know about interacting with all the different kinds of talent that you have to interact with to make these things.
Right.
And he might someday, but maybe working on TV shows has helped him. But you know, he didn't work on 13 Marvel or DC movies before he started working on the DC, because, you know, if he knew these things, Green Lantern would be better than it is. And I think that's something that's really it's really important to take into consideration. They don't have a Kevin Feige.
So with that, I mean, again, you can have the whole argument of like the whole like multiverse and that, like sandbox thing. That's a different discussion. But in your own personal opinion, if Warner Brothers was to say get a Kevin Feige-esque figure who were to oversee things and make sure that there's a cohesive narrative, who would you personally think would be the best fit for that?
Honestly, I don't know that there is anyone. You know, as I said, Kevin Feige coming up through the ranks, you know, interning, he specifically worked on 13 Marvel movies before the MCU.
Right.
So his sort of job in life was to take this. He had a vision. He saw what could have been done and what should be done, and implemented that decision. And by the way, it didn't work out entirely at first, because we went from Iron Man to Incredible Hulk. You know, but how cool is it that they're incorporating like Thunderbolt Ross? You know, they're bringing back Tim Roth to play the Abomination again. Yes. You know, they've even turned that into an asset, because they see what might have worked and what didn't work, and what did work. We're going to change it up, and we're going to make it work. Because Kevin knows how to make. Maybe Alan Taylor wasn't the best director to use, and you know, he's changed up his directing staff. There's a reason why certain directors are brought back and certain directors only make one movie. You know, because he takes risks, but he knows he's got enough in place that if the directors don't work out as well as he'd hoped, his mechanism will hold, and he will shore up those defenses and make sure those movies work. And he has done an amazing thing. And I honestly, I don't think there's anyone in Hollywood right now. I mean, there is a producer named Chuck Roven, who has produced a lot of the DC movies, who by all accounts is an incredibly intelligent guy, but he's not the storytelling visionary. He's a real producer. He's like, I will get these movies made. But you don't have a creative visionary who can wield his own Mjolnir when it comes to story, and there isn't anyone.
There's two people that some people will suggest, and I kind of want to hear your thoughts about it, because I'm kind of undecided on this as well. Of course, there's the hardcore Zack Snyder fans who will say Zack Snyder should just be in charge so that the whole universe centers around his universe, which could work in a sense. But there's also people who say Jim Lee, which, I mean, I love Jim Lee. Jim Lee is an amazing artist, but you know, you talk about people working on movies, and Jim Lee, at least to my knowledge, doesn't have that exact experience with that.
See, the problem is you need somebody that understands how, first and foremost, forget what movies you're making, but how movies are made.
Right.
From every level. And Kevin Feige, there's not a lot of people in Hollywood that get to work on 13 movies before they start the MCU.
Right.
And he worked in a producerial capacity so he could interface with everybody. I mean, I remember it back even when X-Men, you know, I was on set of X-Men 2. I think I met Kevin Feige on the set of X-Men 2 in Vancouver. But there's no one. And like Jim Lee, great creative entity, but he doesn't know anything about how do you do a shared universe of movies. He could probably tell you storytelling, but even Jim Lee, it's not like he just doesn't have that kind of experience. Right. And think about all the people he has to interface with, you know, department heads. He has to know everything about how every single movie is made from beginning to end. And Zack Snyder, he doesn't want to be the architect of, like, he's not the kind of guy that's going to sit in a room with a bunch of
hands dirty. And
he's a director. Zack Snyder is a director. You know, he wants to go make movies. He doesn't want to run. He doesn't want to be
drawing on tables with a Batman gauntlet on. That's what he wants to be doing. You know.
Yes, that's exactly right. And you need to find somebody that wants to be the architect. What you need is like the great executive producer of a TV show, like a great showrunner, and somebody, you know, a showrunner can direct, you know, like Matthew Weiner might direct, who created Mad Men, might direct the first and last episode of the last season or something. And Vince Gilligan, of course, doing Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. But it's different with movies than it is with television. And I honestly, I don't know of anyone who can fill that position. I know that someone like Jeff Johns probably wants to be able to fill that position, but I don't know if he has the temperament as a human being to be able to interface with productions the way someone like Kevin Feige.
And with a lot of allegations against him, it's kind of proven that he can't, you know.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is like, people like Feige. People like working with Feige. They respect Feige. It feels like we're getting a lot of this, especially with the stuff that's happened with Ray Fisher. And I know that there's still, you know, more to unearth and see, you know, where that goes and if it goes anywhere. But still, yet people seem to really respect Feige and his vision, and they trust him. You know, like literally when Ben Affleck comes out and says, look, if Feige tells me something's going to happen, it's going to happen. When you have Batman, you know, doing an interview talking about the head of the Marvel film saying that's a huge statement.
Well, also, I mean, the great thing about Kevin Feige is his track record is unimpeachable. Yeah. Like he is the most successful producer in the history of Hollywood. And he got that way because clearly he loves what he's doing. But at the end of the day, he knows what he's doing. He's not one of these guys. He's not going to backstab people. He's going to be, because he doesn't have to. He's secure. Most of the people that are working in Hollywood are working out of fear. They fear that tomorrow's going to be their last day that they're going to work. They're going to lose their livelihoods. They're going to lose this. They're going to lose that. Kevin Feige approaches it from the exact opposite position. He worked his way up. He knows that he knows that he knows. I mean, I would imagine that to be Kevin Feige is to be probably the most secure, personally secure, self-actualized producer that's ever existed in Hollywood.
He's so secure that he knows that he knows you know that he knows. That's how secure he is.
That's exactly right. And it's been bared out. Though again, Kevin Feige's like, here's my work. Here's my locomotive.
And even if you're not a fan of those characters or of those of that genre or whatever, it still brings people in, it still draws people in, and it still has to be respected. You can't deny it. It's an undeniable force, literally.
I mean, look at this. Their first TV show that he's been responsible for, which is WandaVision. They decide to release it every week. When have you started reading? Since when? Not since Endgame speculation have we seen more ink spilled on the internet about a show than we have about WandaVision. Maybe, you know, The Mandalorian and Luke, but the WandaVision has come in and now everyone's talking about it, and it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yes. Well, man, I'll tell you what. You know, Robert, you are a wealth of knowledge and information, and I love talking to you, man. I enjoy having these conversations. A couple of times I've gotten to talk to you, and I've enjoyed listening to you for years, and
thank you. Well, it's great. You know, thank you for having me on. Now, I want everyone to know that these are just my opinions. I'd like to think they're a little bit more informed than most, but remember, I'm speaking in general terms. Everything should always be taken with a grain of salt, because one, as I said, I don't know Zack Snyder. I'm just basing my opinions on what I've seen over the last 30 years. I mean, there would be a lot of people that say, well, you know, Rob, if you're so knowledgeable, if you're the oracle in Hollywood, why aren't you more financially successful? And I say, well, because, you know, I've spent my life working on projects that I really liked rather than, you know, be tenacious and go after the big money or whatever. I mean, my whole thing is I've still wanted to have a good time, you know, and while I'm very proud, and that's not to say I'm not very proud of all the things I've worked on, and I do have an independent movie that's winning awards at festivals. I did work on a Netflix series that I'm very, very proud of that will be announced on February 12th. that I have. I've been working on for a year and a half, going on to 2 years, that I haven't been able to say what it is. And it is what it is. But I think for a certain contingent of people, they're going to be excited about it, and rightfully so, because it's damn good. I played a very small part of it, but a friend of mine was the showrunner, and I really have enjoyed being able to stay involved in the business. I'm developing a project I really want to make, and hopefully that will reach fruition. But because a lot of people are always like, well, you think you're Mr. Know-it-all. I'm like, no, I'm offering my opinion based on what I understand. I've been a student of the film business for a long time. And also there are people that I've been conversing with lately that know a hell of a lot more than I do, that have given me one thing. If I could offer any advice to anybody, there is nothing wrong with listening to people that know more than you do. And there's no shame in admitting, like, I don't know that. And I've never felt threatened or I've learned more from listening to people than not listening to people.
And it's like Socrates says, like, it's more wise to admit that you don't know than to try and say that you do. Right?
Yeah. And I've also spent a lifetime reading about, like, when I brought up William Goldman's idea that no one knows anything in Hollywood. There are books that I would just recommend. I mean, now they're a little outdated, so people who are younger than me wouldn't necessarily know all of these things, but there are books like Adventures in the Screen Trade, or books like Easy Rider, Raging Bulls, that's all about the filmmakers that emerged out in the 70s. And I would recommend reading all of these things, because they would give you insight into how the studios work. And right now, Hollywood is in the midst of a massive sea change, brought on not only with the streaming wars, but the economic models are changing. COVID really has thrown the business into a loop for the last year, and everyone is scrambling. So it's a really interesting time for the entertainment business. And look, we're getting some amazing, like, never forget, we might all be angry on the internet, whether you're mad about Doctor Who or The Last Jedi or whatever. We still are living in a time of wonder. And whether you look and find things like the Queen's Gambit, which I thought was amazing, whether you're seeing a Luke Skywalker show up at the end of The Mandalorian, we do live in a time, one of the best times to be a fan of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. It really is an amazing time. So every time you get angry, you should remember that there's always something to be really happy about. And I think one of those things is definitely the Snyder Cut, and Denis Villeneuve's Dune, Chloe Zhao after Nomadland, making an Eternals. There's so much cool shit in the world. And never forget that. And you might be angry about stuff, but I just look around, and I mean, this garage, my observatory is chock-a-block full of amazing shit. I can't even believe it exists. And this Thanos figure is just one of many things. And every day there is something even more amazing, whether it's Toshin's Star Wars Archives Volume 2 that covers the prequels, whether it was the Moon Knight omnibus that came out last week, along with the New Mutants omnibus that came out, whether it's your favorite action figure, whether it's the Beastmaster in 4K from Vinegar Syndrome. There's always something amazing that is coming out, and that will be here. So us as fans, remember, the baseline for all of this is that we are all fans of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. We are all what I like to call imagination connoisseurs, and there has never been a better time to be one. And even if you find fandom should understand, that's our baseline. We should at least cherish one another as fans. We all kind of like the same shit. And you know what? If you're arguing with somebody, remember that one day you might sit down across from them and have a beer, and you'll probably really enjoy their company. so don't be too hard on them.
Right. Exactly.
So I do want to thank Kal-El of Krypton for that £5. Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed the stream. TW McKay is a regular around here.
Ooh, he asked a really good question. Yeah,
and so I saw this question earlier, so I wanted to make sure that that we addressed that question.
Okay, this is okay. I made the comment earlier in this stream that if I could give the showrunners at Star Trek 5 science fiction novels to read, what science fiction novels would they be? Now, this is just, I'm not doing any research. I'm just going off the top of my head. I would say that Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons. They were written as one book, but Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion. Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune. Actually, the first 3 Dune books, Dune, and count them as one. Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune. That's 3, right? I have to come up with 2 more. I said Stranger in a Strange Land, right?
Yeah.
Two more that see, now I'm gonna have to come up with this ready-made answer, because there's so many science fiction novels that I think people should read. But if you go back to the canonical works,
no pressure.
I know I'm looking around, I'm looking at my shelves, and I'm thinking, probably Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, maybe Childhood's End. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. That would be one of them. And I think that's 5, right?
Yeah, that's 5.
Those are 5 to start with. Wow. Those are 5 to start with. Yeah.
There you go. There you have it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then I would throw in a book that I'm obsessed by, a 2006 book called Blind Sight by Peter Watts. Who now I've gone down a Peter Watts rabbit hole lately on YouTube, because there's lots of videos of him, and I didn't know that. But Blind Sight, which somebody made a Blind Sight film, which I found, which is crazy. But yeah, those are, I would start there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, man, you're awesome. I know we got to talk toys sometime. We got to talk.
Oh my God.
We got to talk that sometime, but I like I said, I really appreciated your video and you speaking out, because there's so many people. There's been so many negative voices about this, and then there's been so many people that have talked about it. I've literally heard people talk about it like it's a director's cut, like they don't get into it. And when I saw you really get into it, you started saying things that we've been saying, Dawson and I and others that we stream with, and opinions that we have, and talking to people, and just really getting down to the meat of what this is. I mean, and you put it best, man, and so eloquently, when you were just like, Zack Snyder got effed. Like that's what it was, man.
I love that. That's eloquent.
Yes.
No, he did.
Yeah,
it's as plainly as you can put it. I mean,
no, he did. He got fucked by a studio that had unrealistic expectations, and got in too deep. And you had people at the studio that were thinking about, well, as they always do, money and the film itself, and what was really being done, and what was going on there. It was all. They weren't thinking of their movie as its own business. Mm-hmm. And it
always
was
comparing to the Marvel stuff, always comparing.
Yeah. And also they had that AT&T merger. And the thing is, I understand but here's I worked once. I actually was working on a Warner Brothers movie called Free Willy. and the director of Free Willy left 6 weeks before production, and his name was Robin Armstrong. And I liked Robin Armstrong, and I went and worked with him. I was his director of development for a year. But the reason I went to work with him, and the reason he got the job directing Free Willy, he actually left and Simon Windsor took over. But he made a really beautiful, low-budget movie called Pastime, which is a minor league baseball movie. Mm-hmm. And it's basically about an over-the-hill pitcher who's going to get replaced by the actor Glenn Plummer, who is in Showgirls, this new up-and-coming pitcher. And the movie's all about him coming to terms with this. And Noble Willingham, this actor, who's a great character actor, plays the coach of this team. And he said something in the movie, and this is actually what made me want to work with this director, even though he quit Free Willy. The Noble Willingham says to this pitcher, he says, listen, it doesn't matter how good someone else is. It doesn't make you any better or any worse. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, man, that is advice for life, because we're always trying to compare and contrast ourselves. You Warner Brothers should not be looking over at Disney. Now, I understand in the world we live in the corporate world, everyone's like, they're making a 1.5 billion, Endgame, $3 billion. Why aren't you doing that? Well, because we're not them. We're us.
Yeah.
And to compare and contrast, just because we're both making superhero movies, that's like saying all cop movies or all lawyer movies should be exactly the same.
Right.
We're making superhero movies, but that's where our similarities end. And what we need to do is we can aspire to them, sure. We can use them as a benchmark and an indicator of where we would like to be.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to concentrate on what we are.
Right.
And not what we want ourselves to be. We shouldn't constantly look over there and go, don't use Marvel as an indicator of success. Use yourself and use your own product as an indicator of success.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I think that the Dark Knight trilogy that Christopher Nolan made is the place where you should look. There's a singular vision there. A filmmaker proves themselves to you, and you let that filmmaker, with the support you can give them, do what they can do. Don't hire a filmmaker to make a Birds of Prey movie and then, snap their Achilles tendon or something. You've got to
their ability to edit their movie and put their movie together. Yeah.
Don't hire a trailer company to cut your feature because we have to make it more like, what was that about? I've never seen it. It was hard for me to watch Suicide Squad because it's edited like where somebody used a machine gun to cut scenes together.
Yeah.
So
no, very, very true.
Yeah, it baffles me, and we sit around here and we talk about these things on a weekly basis, and it's really sad. It's really sad because, like you said, this constant catch-up game thing, looking off to Marvel. I remember when I first started playing guitar. I was 15 when I started playing guitar. I sucked. I got in with all these guys and everything, and I remember they used to watch like instructional videos or like videos of like their favorite guitar players and stuff, and they'd see somebody and they'd go, "Oh, doesn't it just make you sick? Doesn't it just make you want to just put down your guitar and never play it again?" And I'd look at them and like, no, it makes me want to go home, pick up my guitar and write something or play something or learn something and be better. And I think those are the two different ways that people look at stuff. Like you said, you either look at something and you go, okay, this is what everybody else is doing. We've got to be like everybody else. And if we don't do that, we suck. Or you're an innovator, like you said, and you take it back to heart and you go, hey, this is what everybody else is doing. I've got a vision here. I'm going to put together a vision. If I don't even have one right now, I'm going to craft this. I'm going to make this the best that it can be. And if it's not the same as all that, that's fine, because it doesn't have to be that. This is us. This is our identity. When you look at DC characters compared to Marvel characters, they're different. Even though it's comic books, they're different. They have a different approach. They have a different background. They have a different way of presenting themselves. And they even have a different place in our pop culture. Yeah. And so the thing is that DC should never have tried to be Marvel or to emulate that. They should have crafted it and been themselves from the beginning.
It's like me as a striving artist looking at Jim Lee art and saying, I have to be exactly like Jim Lee or else I'm a failure. Yeah. Which, like, don't get me wrong, Jim Lee's the king when it comes to like illustrating comic books. He does a fantastic job. But like, I read books that has Jim Lee art, and I'm just looking like, instead of saying, I'm never gonna be as good as Jim Lee, I have to say to myself, what can I learn from what he does, and how can I implement it into what I do?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you have to stop thinking about you're never going to be as good as Jim Lee. You have to start thinking about how I need to be as good as I can be.
Exactly. Be your best version of yourself, not be a replication of somebody else.
One of my favorite comic artists of all time, and I was lucky you can see the interview I did with him on my own YouTube channel on the Burnettwork, is Bill Sienkiewicz. And I'm a huge Bill Sienkiewicz fan, and he had sort of a crisis of when he first started doing comics and he was doing things like Moon Knight. The first 30 issues of Moon Knight that he did, that Doug Mensch wrote and that he illustrated, he was drawing like Neil Adams at first. And he realized that he was doing that. And during his tenure on Moonlight, he moved away from that. And he started developing his own style. And it was really exciting to watch. And then when he jumped onto New Mutants, his style exploded. And a lot of people didn't like it because it was very different than what it wasn't Cockrum. I forget who was, but it was Bob McLeod doing New Mutants, but he was doing different, very different. But then Sienkiewicz I followed him wherever he would go, and I watched this, then when he's doing Elektra Assassin mixed media, it was crazy. And he became who he is. And he's still one of my favorite artists of all time in any medium. And if he had sat there and just said, well, I'm never going to be, if he didn't, he developed his own thing. And that's all any of us can do. And of course, we're always influenced by other people. But look at Quentin Tarantino. He steals from everybody. His movies are a pastiche of other people's films, yet they're still filtered through his sensibilities. And even though Quentin Tarantino is borrowing from the best, they are unmistakably Quentin Tarantino movies. Mm-hmm. And he took from all of his favorites and he mixed them up in the blender inside his imagination and came up with something new and unique that people have been trying to copy since he started working in 92 when Reservoir Dogs came out. And it's been crazy. You can't copy Quentin Tarantino. All you can do is try, and everyone knows it.
Yeah.
So you got to go be you.
Yeah.
Well, Dawson, I think I have figured out who should lead the DCEU. Who should be the Kevin Feige of the DCEU? I put a lot of thought into this now, and I had to agree with Robert. I didn't know. But the more I hear him talk about it and the more I see the passion, Robert, why don't you just do it?
Yes.
Okay. Let me
backtrack here.
No, I appreciate that. But here's the thing. I honestly would take that responsibility. I would. But from a perspective of how the business works, I simply haven't done anything that gives me the credibility to take over the reins. People are like, well, you should take over the reins of Star Trek. Or you should take over the reins of, look, it is a very, like I said.
People are like, you should just have this person on. Somebody's like, well, you should just, when you were here last time, and I was like, man, I'd love to interview Brandon Routh. Somebody's just like, well, you should just get him. Like,
it's like, yeah, because it's that simple.
I got his number. Okay, I'll do it. Like, you should just do it. I mean, there are ways to find things and do things, but yeah.
I mean, I would not, the problem is now I wouldn't have the credibility if I was inserted into a position where I was running Star Trek or the DCEU. I wouldn't have the credibility with all of the people that would need to believe in me in order to take over. They would never trust my judgment. They'd be like, who the fuck are you? You were a management trainee at Warner Brothers 30 years ago for Bill Young. And while Bill Young was very capable, I just don't have that kind of credibility. Now, I think, to be honest, I think I could do it because I would earn the credibility. I would, but at first it would be really difficult. People are going to be like, we're making $150 million movies. Who the hell are you? And this is something that I completely understand. And, I have no problem with that. I know that's the case, and that's just the reality of the world. But I know that, a lot of other people are like, I'm going to take over and do this. I'm like, I think I could do it. But the problem would be, it would be really difficult because the people that I would need to listen to me would not. Hell, people don't even listen to me now. I mean, people I'm working with, I'm like, this is what's going to happen. And then they're like, and then I have to come back and say, I told you so. I mean, even though I don't say that, but I'm like, here's what, because, Hollywood is not the real problem is people don't know. And even when they do know, they think they don't. People don't. And when you see the people like our great filmmakers, the real great filmmakers, whether it's, say, David Fincher or Martin Scorsese or Steven Spielberg, these are people that know. Mm-hmm. They know. And that's why they're great. And sometimes, that doesn't mean every movie they make is going to be an award winner. But there are people that they know enough, like they just do. Quentin Tarantino as well. Like, you might not like Death Proof as much as you like his other movies, but I'll tell you something. You might not like The Hateful Eight as much as you like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You might not like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as much as you like Reservoir Dogs. But at least when you sit down and watch a Quentin Tarantino movie, you're going to get something that's worth watching. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also true of Martin Scorsese. And it's true of any of our great filmmakers. Look, you might not like Mank, you might not be interested in the story that it's telling, but you have to at least appreciate the craft. And I think that's what we want. We want creators that are giving us something of value. And whether they're men, whether they're women, whether they're straight, gay, whether they're people of color, whether they're conservative, whether they're liberal, whether they're Democrats, whether they're Republicans, what we want are people of all walks of life, all kinds of folks. If they have true authorship, if they're giving us something that is unique and worth experiencing, you might not even necessarily agree with their point of view. But if they've given us something that clearly is well thought out, that has value, that's important.
And especially with those different backgrounds you mentioned, like those different personalities, different opinions, it offers people a broader perspective that expands beyond their own, which is always important.
Always. I mean, I end every one of my shows saying every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. I say that on every one of my shows. And I think one of the big problems, and we're seeing it in fandom, everyone's at odds with one another.
They're hyper-focused on their one specific thing. And if it's not that way, then it's the highway.
Yeah. And I would say all of us, our baseline is that we're fans.
Yeah.
And, you might be a fan of Sailor Moon, and I might be a fan of Cowboy Bebop. But we do like anime. And if we do, then maybe we can find some common ground. And I think in this country, especially in America, we're all Americans. I would imagine that we all believe in the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. If we're Americans and we believe in those things, you might be on opposite polar sides of the planet, in terms of ideologically, but ultimately we're both Americans. So there must be some common ground where we can start a dialogue with one another.
Right.
We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. There's a statement all Americans should believe in. Now, can't we start there? And why don't we start talking about that one sentence and see where our conversation goes? Because I think that, look, whether you hate The Last Jedi or not, we all love Star Wars. Look, I have not been a fan of the Disney Star Wars trilogy. I think because the Disney Star Wars trilogy was conceived because of corporate interests first and foremost, as opposed to storytelling interests. And, you listen to Bob Iger talk. If Bob Iger, I'm a fan of because he's a captain of industry, he says, those masterclass ads that you see in front of YouTube videos he has a masterclass. He teaches a masterclass, and in that little ad that is in a YouTube video, he talks about that Disney princesses are part of the core of their business. Well, of course, their trilogy was going to focus around a female protagonist. This was something that Disney it was inevitable. And so knowing this, and then you have to go, okay, we're going to create a female protagonist to be part of that's going to lead the Disney Star Wars trilogy. Well, great. Okay. Then let's make her as fully developed as Ariel or Belle or Mulan, or whatever. Yeah. Let's start there. But it began with Disney's corporate interest in wanting to, you didn't think about the great story. You decided from a corporate standpoint, what you wanted first and foremost was we want a new Disney princess that's tied to Star Wars. Whether that was good for Star Wars, where I would have gone the other direction. I would have said, we've bought Star Wars. How are we going to tell the best Star Wars story we can? Because if we make and we plan it out, we know we're going to make a trilogy. So let's sit down and plan that shit from day one. We got to figure out a way and implement the plan. But again, it was Disney corporate that called those shots. And that's never going to work. No. Not entirely.
And that's what we talk about here, Robert, is just that. Exactly, Rob. I may like something that you don't like, you may like something that I don't like, but at the end of the day, we're fans of things, we're all passionate about things, and let's just respect each other for that and not waste this time. there's also talk about this, toxic fandom and, and these, these kind of things. And I do agree that there are times that people get really out of hand.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. 100%.
It's just human nature.
Yeah. And they do things or they say things or whatever that are inappropriate or just wrong. But the thing is that I think the majority of people who are fans of these things are just fans of these things. Like I talk to people all the time, and I like Goober's $5 super chat down there. It says hashtag Robert Meyer Burnett for DCEU. But
you're gonna have this whole campaign now. You can't run from it.
I know now you can't run from it. But no, my thing is like, because like what you just said, like for example, like I love The Last Jedi, right? And I talk to people, and it's funny because when I talk to people about it, like I don't begrudge somebody who doesn't like it. I want to have a conversation with them. And it's funny because I'll talk to some people and there's people who are very passionate about it. And they're like, yeah, I hate it. It's horrible. It's awful. And they have like all these reasons, and that's fine. And then I'll talk to like the common person and I'm like, yeah, this is going on. And they're like, there's people who don't like the sequels. And I look at them with these eyes that like,
oh yeah,
if you only knew, like the whole Zack Snyder thing, and it's like, well, yeah, what's this Snyder cut thing about? And you tell them, and it's like, oh,
boy, do I have a story for you.
Yeah, right. It's like I want to sit down and just like open up a big book with a fireplace and be like, it all started back in, and just kind of go through it. But
I
respect each other,
Yeah, I think that the most exciting thing about the Snyder cut for me is I get to see a vision fulfilled.
Yes.
And look, I know that we're talking about a corporate owned product.
Yeah.
But and that's, make no mistake, it is that. It is something that was designed. The Justice League was supposed to make $1.5 billion. That's what it was supposed to do. And to me, it's the fulfillment, whether you like what Zack Snyder does or not. And I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to see it. I'm going to clear out my schedule, and it's the 18th, right?
March 18th. Yep.
March 18th. Do we know what day that is? Is that a Friday?
That's a Thursday.
So it's a Thursday. So it's going to drop Wednesday night at 9 p.m.
Yeah,
on the West Coast.
I hope not, because that'd be midnight for me. And like, Hollywood, throw the East Coast a bone, please.
That's the question right now. That's the question, because they haven't given the time that it drops.
Yeah. Well, it's like The Expanse. The Expanse. Ooh, it's 6 o'clock. It's supposed to drop the next day, but it's like 6 o'clock the night before, and there's The Expanse. I'm going to turn it on.
Yeah, right.
But I just can't wait to see Zack Snyder's. I mean, if nothing else, it'll be like, I expect if you turned down the sound and listened to it silent, it'd just be like watching a book of paintings flow by. And it's going to be something. I can't wait to see it. I mean, the Justice League was one of the most disappointing experiences in my entire life. And for a kid, my favorite comic book when I was a kid was Justice League. And I lived every year for the Justice Society, Justice League of America team-ups. I lived for that, and I was buying the first Justice League comic that I ever got. It wasn't the first one I got, but it was Justice League 114, which had Crisis on Earth 3 in it, and it was the where they had Ultraman and Power Ring and Owlman, this crime syndicate. I read that comic 100 million times, and it was a 100-page giant-sized story because they would reprint stories, and that was the most I loved it so much. And then my mom would she'd find me the Justice League issue every month, on the spindle racks, and I love the Justice League, and I grew up Super Friends cartoon, the hour-long version with Wendy and Marvin.
Heck yeah!
Before the Wonder Twins, and when they had Green Arrow on it, and they had the Flash, and they had Plastic Man, and I love, and Mego, the Mego figures, and it was great.
I got a set of them out in my living room, and
of course you do.
Well, of course.
I bought the Batman with the cowl that came off. The first two that came out were Superman and Batman, and I bought those figures.
Yes,
and they were the greatest. Those figures were amazing. But listen, gents, I got to go do my own show.
Yeah, man. So, but hey, thank you so much, Robert, for being
Yes.
here. We love you, man. We appreciate you. And
Well, thanks for having me. This was a great conversation. Thanks for letting me
absolutely
run off the mouth.
Yep, and you are welcome back anytime. We'll have to figure out a way to get you back in here. Another topic that we can discuss. Maybe once this all comes out, we can come back and dissect what we.
And we'll have to get back on Four Nerds sometime. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, no, I'd love to do that. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see. I mean, already, I would just hope that before making up your mind, sit down and watch it.
Yes.
You know, and before you watch it, watch Man of Steel again. Watch the ultimate cut of BVS. And then watch Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Heck
I
yeah.
bet it'll be a very fulfilling experience.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Dawson, for coming on in and having some fun with us. Thank you to everyone who's watching. Thank you to everybody in the chat and all the moderators. And I appreciate each and every one of you guys for stopping by today and having this conversation and talking about something that's very near and dear to our heart. As I always say, don't let anybody tell you that your fandom doesn't matter, that your thing doesn't matter, and don't try to tell somebody else that their love of a fandom doesn't matter. Try to find equal ground. Try to have conversations about what you like and you don't like. And whatever you do, just treat everybody with respect. And as long as you do that, there'll always be a place for you all here at the Poindexter Lounge. We'll see you next time. Stay nerdy. Bye-bye.